21. Giant in the Cave. That evening, Hermione finished another library book, stretched by the fire, and decided it was time to wash up and go to bed. Just then, Harry and Ron slipped over in a conspiratorial way. The common room was empty, but they were still behaving secretively. Night outing? Hermione asked. She could tell what they were up to from the look on their faces without a word. Are we that obvious? Ron said in disbelief. Extremely obvious, Hermione replied. Hermione, have you finished your book? Harry asked, bright with excitement. Just finished. What are you planning? Just come with us, Harry said mysteriously. Hermione didn't expect them to have an actual destination. She assumed they had been dawdling. She tidied up, pulled on the invisibility cloak, and followed the boys out of the common room. They walked together until they stopped around a corner, where they almost ran into a professor on night patrol. Hermione yanked Ron back just in time. He had been about to step on the professor's robes. They continued along the fourth-floor corridor until they reached a weathered, one-eyed, hunchbacked witch statue. Harry glanced around, then whispered a spell at the stone figure. Finite incantatum. The statue swung open, revealing a narrow, descending passage. Hurry, Mum, we'll be back soon, Ron muttered. Only after all three had slipped into the passage and the statue rumbled shut behind them did they finally breathe. Where does this lead? Hermione asked, curiosity piqued. She recalled fragments of strange, half-remembered visions she had seen by chance when spells had been cast, images of a dark tomb where two bronze imps leapt from behind a sarcophagus and jabbed at someone's side, or of a magnificent underground hall where a chariot studded with spikes sent people scattering. Up close, those things must be terrifying. From the outside, they were intoxicatingly interesting. It used to lead to Hogsmeade, Ron explained, voice a little pale. It was the secret way to the only wizarding village in Britain that Muggles don't know about. But since Hogwarts started moving, this passage has been abandoned. We're not going to the end and falling out of Hogwarts, are we? Hermione asked. No, we've already been through it once, Harry said. This passage has been put to other use. Ron shut his eyes, took several deep breaths, and said solemnly, Wait, let me psych myself up. I've done it before. Hermione hurried on, intrigued. They stopped wearing the invisibility cloak inside the passage, and their pace quickened. Soon they saw dim light ahead and heard a rustling all around them. Ron's face went even whiter, as if Fred and George had fed him a truly awful every flavor bean. Why isn't it brighter? Hermione wondered. Lumos was a basic charm. She produced a tiny globe of light that hovered above her head. Don't, Ron hissed, but it was too late. The blue light flared, and the passage revealed itself more clearly. It was less a carved corridor and more a natural cave tunnel. Lining the descending steps, countless small spiders crowded toward the hole at the passage's end. Help! Ron almost sobbed. I wish I couldn't see them. Why did you light them up? The spiders, drawn to the light, gathered around the trio, but they weren't hostile. They simply swarmed like insects curious about a lamp. Only poor Ron suffered. Hermione noticed something important. They weren't interested in the people, only in the light. She crouched and delicately scooped up one of the little spiders and held it close to her face to study it. Ron shrieked and cowered behind Harry. They've got something strange in their bellies, Hermione murmured, peering at the creature. And my light charm, it's feeding them. They're attracted to some kind of radiance or phosphorescence. Harry looked thoughtful and tugged them along. Don't stop here. We'll be there soon. Hermione quickened her pace as well. She was curious where the spiders were going. The two boys dragged a trembling Ron forward, surrounded on all sides by the small creatures. At last, the passage opened into a large circular cavern with paths leading off in several directions. Spiders of every size scuttled over rocks and through thick white webs that hung like curtains in the dimness. In the center of the cave, a low fire burned under a big pot, steam rising in the glow. Piled nearby were blankets, umbrellas, stools, odds and ends arranged as if someone had claimed the place as a temporary home. A huge black dog lay by the fire, pretending to sleep. Harry, is that you? Came a loud, somewhat tired voice from across the fire. Hermione saw a tall figure half in shadow at the edge of the light, wrapped in a heavy blanket and propped against the cave wall. It's me, Harry called, pulling Hermione and Ron forward. Hagrid, This is Hermione, the brilliant first-year witch I told you about. Oh, Fang, don't lick her. Harry scolded the enthusiastic dog, and Hermione reached down to stroke him. His coat was surprisingly soft. This is Hagrid, the former gamekeeper of Hogwarts, Harry added, then corrected his tone. He's on Dumbledore's payroll now, but he's been laid up here for a bit, recuperating. Hermione stepped forward and examined the giant man. Even sitting, he towered over them. His beard was thick and his face a little pale, but his smile was warm. Hello, Hagrid. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Nah, not at all. I've been bored out of me skull. If Harry and his mates hadn't found this place, I'd have gone mad, Hagrid said with a booming laugh. They're always going on about you, the clever little muggle witch. Fancy some rune spore? Harry and Ron exchanged warning looks, mouthing don't behind Hermione's back, but Hermione never turned down food. To their astonishment, she bit into a hard, rock-like biscuit Hagrid offered and chewed with obvious pleasure. It's a bit tough, she said, but what's that seasoning? Tarragon and nutmeg. There's dill in the aftertaste. It's delicious. Hagrid beamed. I knew you'd like it. Got plenty if you want more. Why are you recovering here? It's full of spiders. Why not the hospital wing? Hermione asked, breaking off pieces of the biscuit to share. She wasn't one to eat alone. Hagrid shrugged and settled back against the rock, the firelight making the shadows of the cavern flicker. Around them, the small spiders drifted closer to the light, and the pot simmered over the flames, steam scenting the cave with something oddly familiar and homey. 22. A string of secrets. These are Aragog's children. They won't hurt anyone. Aragog's an acromantula I raised from a tiny spider, Hagrid explained. I need these little darlings to help with my injuries. I can't leave here yet. He gestured helplessly at his bandaged right hand. Hermione noticed dozens of small spiders scuttling over the bandages, spitting a faintly glowing milky white liquid near the wound. Don't let Hagrid's gruff manner put you off. He's a good sort. He even brought me a birthday cake when he called at my house, Harry told Hermione. Are you in the Order of the Phoenix, then? Hermione asked curiously. Anyone who works for Dumbledore is, Hagrid laughed. If it weren't for Dumbledore, I'd probably be dead in a nuclear explosion by now. I've been at Hogwarts so long, but I've never actually met the headmaster. He only sent his phoenix to the opening feast, Hermione said, remembering the fiery red bird, then turned to Harry and Ron. Have you two ever seen Dumbledore? They both thought a moment and shook their heads. Harry said, My mum and dad always talk about him, but Dumbledore's so busy, though I heard he was holding me when I was a baby. Not just Dumbledore, so was I. You were that small, you fit in the sidecar of my flying motorcycle, Hagrid added fondly. Ron, eyeing the spiders nervously, mumbled, There's so many people in my family that Dumbledore probably wouldn't even remember my name. Hermione narrowed her eyes. As the head of an organization, Dumbledore wouldn't realistically have never met any of the members' children. Something wasn't quite right. Harry pulled a chocolate frog card from his pocket. Look, this is Dumbledore. Hermione studied the card. Dumbledore, with his long white beard and half-moon spectacles, smiling and winking. The back listed his accomplishments, among them a joint discovery with Nicholas Flamel of the 12 uses of dragon's blood. Hagrid shrugged. Don't worry about it. Dumbledore's got his reasons. I can't say too much, but he's always busy trying to save the world, he said, and his expression betrayed that he was keeping something back. Hermione didn't press. She knew when to respect boundaries. You're badly hurt. Was it a dark wizard? She asked, changing the subject. No. Some kind of mutated creature. Very dangerous. Dumbledore had me move them away from Muggle settlements, Hagrid explained briskly, as if his wound were nothing. Heaven knows what happens when a nasty magical beast like a swamp diggler interbreeds with mutated crocodiles. I just tried to be kind, asked them to move deeper into the swamp so Muggles could fish at the edges. They wouldn't listen, so I went in and took their eggs. That made them angry. He blinked, almost proud of himself. They're big and strong, sharp teeth and poisonous bites. I got bitten a bit, my own fault, so I'm stuck here recovering. Hagrid laughed. That venom was nasty, stronger than Aragog's. Hermione thought that most people wouldn't live long enough to compare two kinds of venom and tell the tale. Still, parts of Hagrid's story sounded rehearsed, like a cover for some other truth. She let it lie. Tell me about Aragog. How big is an acromantula? She mimed a large circle with her hands. Bigger than that, Hagrid roared. He's not about right now, or I'd let you meet him. He'd be about half as big as this cave. When he hatched, he was only the size of a palm. I fed him breadcrumbs. He's always been obedient, never hurt anyone. He usually hides unless I call. Merlin, I hope I never meet him. How can there be such a gigantic spider? Ron went pale and hugged Fang closer. Hermione, on the other hand, brightened. She was fascinated by strange creatures. She rattled off observations. Hairy beasts hate fire. Huge creatures can be outmaneuvered by doors. Heavily armored ones are vulnerable to lightning, and mused that Aragog sounded like a formidable predator. You must have studied magical creatures a lot to train him so well, she said. I even got expelled from Hogwarts because of him, Hagrid said, rubbing his head and laughing. But I love these little darlings. When you lot have care of magical creatures in third year, I'll bring in lots of interesting beasts. That would be brilliant. I nearly had Lucius wanting to use the killing curse on me, and I didn't even get expelled, Hermione blurted, curious. What did you do back then? 50 years ago, the Chamber of Secrets was opened and a student was killed, and the Ministry blamed Aragog, Hagrid said indignantly. But Aragog was that small and kept in the cupboard. How could it have been him? He saw Hermione happily nibbling a rune spore and felt hungry himself. He grabbed a piece and crunched it. Lucky for me, Dumbledore took me on as keeper and secretly fixed my wand. He patted the pink umbrella at his side. At that time, Hogwarts was still up in the Scottish Highlands, wasn't it? Harry asked. I'd love that. Black Lake, the Forbidden Forest, and Hogsmeade right outside. Professor Quirrell had mentioned such things in History of Magic. It's nice that the castle can move now, though. You get to see different sights, Ron added. The Chamber of Secrets, you and Dumbledore didn't look into it any further? Hermione pressed. Slytherin's chamber, the legend says, was left for his heir. It supposedly hides a weapon to rid the school of Muggle-borns, Ron supplied, lowering his rune spore as his jaw ached. Hagrid scratched his uninjured hand. The ghost of the murdered student couldn't tell us anything, and after that no one else died, so it fizzled out. A ghost? Hermione exclaimed. Harry and Ron both looked puzzled. Are there ghosts at Hogwarts? Real spirits? Hermione asked eagerly. Why haven't I seen any yet this term? Have either of you? If we met a ghost out on a night walk, we'd probably be scared stiff, Harry said. My brothers never mentioned any ghosts either, Ron added. Don't pester me, kids. I've said enough, Hagrid said shortly. He scooped up a handful of rune spore and with surprising gentleness thrust them into Hermione's arms. It's getting late. Best be off to bed. Any later and… Harry, your mum will be round bringing me medicine. Under Hagrid's imposing presence, the three had little choice but to take their leave. They retraced their steps through the starlit night. Hermione tucked under one arm a supply of rune spore that would last several days. Are there really ghosts at Hogwarts? I've only seen werewolves and vampires. Harry kept up a whisper of excited conversation. There's a ghoul in my backyard that Fred and George torment all the time. I wonder what real ghosts are like. Do they just materialize like in books? Spiders that seem to carry some strange radiation, giants hiding in secret passages, a headmaster who rarely shows his face, and vanished ghosts. What other secrets did this castle hold? Hermione realized, with a small thrill, that her student life was unlikely to be dull. 23. Practical course life at Hogwarts was satisfying, even if Professor McGonagall still hadn't found a suitable second-year textbook. Hermione spent most of her time in the library. Apart from Lucius, the other professors rarely set long written assignments. Their demands were mostly practical. Professor Flitwick, for example, required students to cast a particular spell a set number of times before the next lesson. A small camera-like device, enchanted with a directional memory charm, could scan a wand and record how many times a given spell was cast over a period. Only a professor as incompetent as Lucius would fob us off with an essay, Ron grumbled as he hurried to finish his homework. He and Harry, both fond of wandering the castle at night, only came to Hermione when the deadline loomed. Look on the bright side, Hermione said. We'll see him again in practical class. She refused to let them copy her essay. Lucius was waiting for any mistake, and she wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Practical class was the most anticipated day for nearly every first year. Every boy dreamed of triumphing in a duel and basking in glory. When the day arrived, however, most of them were oddly hesitant. This was real combat, not childish scuffles. They had learned only a handful of spells, and whether those spells would work in practice felt a matter of luck. Only Hermione seemed calm. Fighting had been ordinary in the forbidden land she came from, where a walk could lead to a giant bear, and brawls at the city gate with dragons were nothing special. When everyone gathered on the flying class lawn, the first practical lesson of the year was about to begin. The broom racks had been moved aside, a dozen target dummies were scattered around, and several circles about 20 meters across were marked on the grass. The four deans stood solemnly inside those circles. Lucius and Professor Flitwick were at the front. This class, almost the most important since the reforms, had the feel of military training. Student numbers were low after the war. All 7 years combined barely reached 200, and this year's first-year cohort was particularly small. Besides the deans, Professor Potter stood at the edge of the lawn. Lily Potter had come to watch her son perform, as any mother would be anxious when her child prepared to spar. "Your mum's watching from behind, nervous?" Ron nudged Harry. "Don't bother me. I'm memorizing the key points of the levitation charm," Harry said, taking a deep breath, a little flustered. "Don't worry," Hermione whispered, standing on tiptoe to observe the older students. "With all 7 years together, the real duels will probably be between 6ths and 7ths. For us, it'll be children's play." Once everyone had assembled, Lucius stepped forward, leaning on his pale staff. "Very good. No one is late," he said, his tone as condescending as someone choosing laborers in a market. "After a holiday, I'm sure your practical abilities have improved, whether you come from wizarding families or apprenticed with professors." His gaze slid over the students and lingered on Hermione. "I hope you remember that your 7 years at Hogwarts will be the safest and most valuable 7 years of your life. The knowledge you gain here will be your reliance to survive in this apocalyptic world." His attention fixed on Hermione as if trying to pierce her, he continued. "I have taught and seen many geniuses, but only those who survive to the end deserve to be called." He was about to finish when Professor Flitwick, no longer willing to listen to him ramble, cut in. "All right, children, enough idle talk. Now I want to see the results of your holiday practice." He flicked his silver prosthetic hand. With a click, his wand sprang free, and he caught it neatly. "Same rules as before. 5th, 6th, and 7th years choose opponents freely. 2nd, 3rd, and 4th years observe first. As for first years, I think we need to do some basic instruction." Lucius pushed forward before Flitwick could finish. "Let me handle it, Professor Flitwick. There are a few promising 7th years I've heard much about at Malfoy Manor. You'll want to supervise them personally." He turned back to the first years. "I'm quite capable of instructing the beginners." Flitwick glanced at him, said nothing, then clapped his hands and began organizing the older students. Practical lessons were injury-prone, so the professors moved to supervise with care. Left on the first-year side were Lucius and Professor Potter, Lily, watching from a safe distance. "Now it's just us," Lucius announced, striding like a peacock in front of the new students. Behind him, the large circle had been left open for the first years. "Practical class evolved from the old dueling clubs," he observed, looking toward Flitwick and the students already testing their spells. "Your charms professor used to be a dueling champion. But dueling is an outdated form, fit only for peacetime," he went on. "Once the world is filled with dark wizards, twisted beasts, and goblins, no one will politely stand still while you cast a spell." With a sweep of his staff, 2 dummies flashed with red light, were launched backward and smashed into the castle's outer wall. "Speed, precision, and an unwavering belief in victory," he barked. "Those are the basics of combat. Maybe you've learned a few flashy moves or bested opponents doing the same, but that's not real combat." He glanced at Draco, who looked distracted, and thought irritably that it shouldn't have taken more than one beating for Draco to be humbled. Real fighting requires considering many external and internal factors. The intensity of magic on both sides, casting speed, imaginative variation, even insight into an enemy's weaknesses. If you think learning a few powerful spells lets you go anywhere you please, you might as well die early from a deformed Puffskind's noxious sneeze. Draco Malfoy, Lucius called sharply. Draco, startled, pushed through the crowd and stood before his father. As heir to Malfoy Manor, you are meant to be different. You had training before you came to school. First-year practicals don't need profound techniques. Learn to evade attacks whenever possible. Set an example for your classmates. Having failed to shame Hermione earlier, Lucius decided to ignore her and instead make his son the model student he wished to showcase. 24. Showdown. On the flying class grounds, the upperclassmen's practical duels were already underway. Intense exchanges of spells, inventive uses of transfiguration, and even potions, enchanted plants, and animals thrown into the mix, all of it dazzling the watching students. Professor Flitwick kept a close eye on things, with several other professors nearby to step in if things went too far. Still, spells sometimes went awry. Potions were misthrown, and now and then a contender needed hurried treatment before being sent to the hospital wing. On the first-year side, Lucius Malfoy's practical lesson for Draco was in full swing. He barked orders without mercy. "You're rolling too slowly. Don't hesitate. Watch my hand. Use the clutter around you. You're not some bouncing lab rabbit. Create cover with your wand. You learned levitation. Use it on the dummy to block their line of sight. If you can't cast it instantly, forget the tricks." Perhaps because he was instructing his son, Lucius threw himself into it. Hermione couldn't deny that his practical class was thorough and precisely what first years needed. Your small magic can't break through an adult wizard's defense. Preserve it. Survival matters more than bravado. He paced and gestured, cane releasing controlled jinxes as Draco scuttled around the practice circle. 3 black, triangular-headed snakes, transfigured creatures, Lucius's specialty, slithered in pursuit, relentless and sharp as blades. Hermione found herself reassessing Draco. His attack was basic, but his ability to survive under Lucius's onslaught, even with Lucius holding back, was notable. Few first years could have lasted so long. Lucius took a private pride in Draco's endurance. As a professor of reversal of anti-wizard techniques, he had invested a great deal in the boy's early training. Draco, he thought, could easily earn an O in any exam now. Popularity, prefeccies, even student council positions would follow. Even Lily Potter, watching nearby, looked impressed. "Hermione, Draco is amazing," Ron blurted to her, mouth open. Lucius allowed a faint, almost imperceptible smile. When someone in the crowd murmured about Hermione having once beaten him half to death, Ron's loud voice carried, and suddenly a dozen heads turned toward Hermione with curious, judging looks. Lucius's hand tightened on his cane. The stupefy he'd been preparing glowed a faint green, nearly grazing Draco's head. Draco stumbled, almost getting nipped by the transfigured snakes. "All right, break!" Lucius snapped, abruptly halting the attack as if Ron's remark hadn't been heard. He let Draco pant and hustled him back to the group. "Draco has shown most of the fundamentals first years must master. Your task this year is to learn them. Now I need another volunteer to experience what we just did. Who will come up?" he asked, scanning the semicircle. The students who had been eager earlier now shrank back. Lucius's relentless spell work and the blade snakes were intimidating. No one moved. A hand rose. "Professor, may I try?" Lucius recognized the owner of the hand with a flush of dismay, Hermione Granger. He tried to dissuade her. "Are you sure, Miss Granger? I will not hold back." The more difficult the task, the more alive Hermione became. Her excitement showed on her face. "Of course. It's fine. Life or death, it doesn't matter," she said brightly, much to the stunned silence of her classmates. Lucius cursed her inwardly, but let her step forward. "Remember," he said blankly as they took their places, "no ready, no announcing start. You must anticipate when I attack." Hermione had already switched into combat mode. She took the staff from her back, gripped it with both hands at chest height, and exhaled slowly, centering herself. Without warning, a red jet of light burst out of Lucius's cane, a faster, sharper stupefy than before. A normal first year would have been hit before they knew what happened. Hermione, however, slipped into the subtle motion of the fast and slow technique she'd taught herself in the Forbidden Land. With a single sidestep and a twist of her hips, she slid harmlessly past the red bolt. "You coward! Attacking a child with sneak attacks, Ron cried, indignant. Lucius turned his head without expression. Weasley, insulting a professor. Gryffindor loses 5 points. At almost the same instant, 3 more red bolts streaked out, and the 3 cone-headed snakes, which had briefly stiffened into stone, reanimated and lunged at Hermione. She reacted before they could close the distance. Stepping back and leaping, she hooked with her left hand in a practiced motion. The 3 transfigured snakes found themselves lifted and pitched upward by the force of her movement, just into the path of Lucius's stupefied shots. His 2-hit combo slammed into its own targets and was neutralized. Hermione didn't stop at defense. In the Forbidden Land, she had learned that someone who only rolled away without striking back wouldn't survive long against the Omen Killer's great club. A faint blue glow pulsed at the tip of her staff, the residual radiation-bound power in the demon core metal she'd reforged into it. She whispered an incantation and sent a spray of compact, glowing projectiles skyward. "Shining stone pebbles," she called. Blue meteors streaked toward Lucius. He scoffed. "Foolish. Wasteful," he said coldly. "What I just taught you. Don't squander your magic. How could a first year possibly pierce an adult wizard's shield charm?" He planted his feet and brought his shield charm alive, confident and unmoving. The blue pebbles struck the shield with a sizzle, leaving a small, glowing dent, but causing no further damage. "You used this on Draco, didn't you?" Lucius's face darkened. "A spell with radiation. Did it come from your radiated mother's womb? Do you think this lets you run wild?" Hermione didn't expect the shining stone pebbles to harm him, no more than they could have hurt Draco. Her intent had been to anger him, and it had worked. "Professor McGonagall said your riot once reflected a killing curse and killed a member of the Green Flame Party, didn't she?" she said, voice low. Lucius's expression turned stonier. He let his power bloom outward. The grass around him flattened under the pressure of his magic. "Not every wizard makes a reckless exchange of killing curses," he said. "Today, I'll teach you a lesson." The spells fired at her were no longer limited to stupefy. Flames, ice, curses, hexes. Lucius still showed some restraint, not resorting to truly forbidden magic, but his offense had the precision and force of a full duel. Hermione's situation was the mirror of Draco's earlier. She darted back and forth inside the circle, struggling to keep up. But unlike Draco, though she looked disheveled, much of Hermione's energy went into counterattacks. Every roll or spin became an opportunity to snatch up whatever was at hand and hurl it at Lucius. It did little damage, but it infuriated him. His shield charm was already plastered with dust, grass, and splinters. She flashed a powerful lumos to blind him, made the stars overhead twinkle wildly, amplified sound with sonorous, then cut it off with a silencing charm to leave opponents disoriented. She softened the ground with a transfiguration, or simply deflected attacks with a precise flick of her wand. Hermione fought like a seasoned battle magician. "Has she finished the first-year curriculum already?" Ron demanded in disbelief. "I think so," Harry answered, swallowing. "Blasting curse!" Hermione pinned herself on her wand, dodging a leglocker curse at her feet and kicking up sand and dust that briefly clouded Lucius's vision. "Shining stone pebbles! Shining stone pebbles! Shining stone pebbles!" 3 streams of light struck the shield charm, leaving 3 blue dents. After repeated hits, the shield finally showed cracks, fragmenting like glass. "Confringo!" Lucius shouted aloud for the first time. Until now, he'd been casting quick, silent spells, but frustration snapped him into full voice. With a stomp of his cane, a deafening blast erupted. The dust-choked area exploded outward. "Lucius, what are you doing?" Professor McGonagall rushed forward, shouting. "Don't worry, your young witch won't die," Lucius sneered, looking up at the sky as he casually reforged a new shield charm around himself. Hermione, who'd been briefly levitated, fell. Calm in midair, she reached and dragged the dueling dummies from the wall. They flew toward Lucius, only to be shattered by a lazy sweep of his cane. "Is that all you've got?" he taunted. He drew a circle with his cane, and the grass beneath Hermione buckled. A rock-formed maw packed with jagged teeth yawned open. "Until you truly master flight, don't expose yourself in the air where you can't change direction," he said. He could have simply watched the little girl fall and ended the duel. Under the swirling dust, Hermione's robes whipped around her. Splinters from the shattered dummies scored a red streak across her cheek, but she barely noticed. Her wand spun in her palm and then was gripped like a club. What was she going to do? No one had time to react. In the next instant, the girl, with no apparent leverage, kicked backward and shot more than 2 meters away, as if she had stepped off invisible ground. It's transfiguration. She turned the dust and wood chips into a solid mass in an instant, McGonagall said, incredulous. While transfiguration can change mass, it's limited. Turning air into rock is theoretically possible, but the difficulty is enormous. Hermione had cleverly used the explosion's dust and the wood fragments to increase the mass she was working with, dramatically lowering the difficulty. Even so, transfiguring an irregular three-dimensional field like that on the fly is a feat many adult wizards might fail, not from lack of raw magic, but from a lack of imagination. A wizard cannot perform what he cannot picture. That makeshift platform both pulled Hermione away from the rock maw and launched her directly above Lucius. Still thinking of counterattacking? He sneered. He'd already recast a fresh shield charm. The little girl seemed to have no way to break it. Hermione raised her wand high, stance like the ancient Eastern power split Mount Hua. Attempting to break a shield charm with a wand? Has her head gone soft? Professor McGonagall's shock flashed across her face. Lucius didn't even bother attacking. Letting the charm repel her seemed entertaining. Hermione looked like a lone knight charging at an invincible giant. No one expected anything but a foolish, theatrical move. This was the world of magic, not a medieval battlefield. But Hermione wasn't trying to bash a turtle shell with a stick. The power stored in her wand wasn't only for firing shining stone pebbles. She breathed a low incantation in her heart. Carrion Swiftblade. A luminous blue blade erupted from the tip of her wand. Her normally 1.5-meter wand seemed to lengthen into a 2-meter spear with a glowing edge, descending with the force of her fall. The shield charm split with a sizzling sound, the damaged portion parted like clear glass. No one reacted in time. Hermione landed smoothly as the charm fell apart in two and wavered away like gray lint. Lucius stood frozen inside it, unmoving. He was unhurt. Hermione retracted the blade at the last moment. The Carrion Swiftblade had cut through the shield charm and passed just beside him. Still, a wisp of platinum hair drifted down between them. "Thank you for the match, Professor," Hermione said, straightening and rubbing her aching feet. Even with magic cushioning, a fall wasn't pleasant. "That was recklessly dangerous." McGonagall stormed into the circle, furious. "Lucius, how could you use an exploding charm on a student? What if she hadn't dodged? Miss Granger, you nearly killed a professor, and yourself. Do you understand that?" Lucius snapped. "I'm sorry, Professor. You can deduct points from me," Hermione said with an innocent look. "I was scared by that explosion, too." McGonagall paused, then glared at Lucius, who still looked shaken. The blade of light had passed inches from his face. He had felt its heat and radiation. I saw that she was doing very well, so I just wanted to try," he stammered. The head of Malfoy Manor had almost been split by a first-year student. If anyone heard of this, Malfoy would be a laughingstock. All right, luckily no one was hurt. Professor Flitwick patted his chest and looked pale. "Let's end this farce and get back to class." He tapped Lucius's leg. "Lucius, a few of the 7th years are finished. Help me watch the others. I'll take the first years." Lucius nodded absently and walked away. Flitwick, the diminutive professor, turned to Hermione. "Miss Granger, your magic is unusually destructive. I'm going to forbid you from using these techniques in student duels." "Of course, Professor. I know my limits." Hermione smiled sweetly and fell back into line. 26. Gryffindor loses 10,000 points. Under Professor Flitwick's direction, the next practical combat classes were organized into paired drills. If anyone was injured, Madame Pomfrey stood ready to take them away. Aside from Draco and Hermione, there were 10 first years left. Harry and Ron were paired together, but Ron's old wand acted up and his levitation charm kept stuttering. Harry wasn't much stronger, but his wand was an unwieldy heavy steel flail, so even just lifting it could scare Ron into running circles around the field. As a result, Flitwick imposed a restriction on Harry's wand. He could cast spells with it, but he could not strike another student. Like Hermione's ban, it applied only to first years. Practical combat was meant to be learned without handicaps once students were older. Hermione wanted to go up on the platform and practice too, but no one wanted to face the Gryffindor Queen with overwhelming strength. Even Harry, usually the most daring, felt a chill thinking about Hermione's sword strike from above and about Professor Potter's almost murderous glare behind her. Yet toward Hermione, that same glare was softened into something like doting affection. Hermione herself, however, knew how much of her last encounter had been overblown. Lucius Malfoy had used a powerful blasting curse, but his slow, chanting spell wouldn't realistically have harmed her, only looked impressive. If he had started with unforgivable curses or thrown potions at her, she likely wouldn't have lasted. And although Carrion Swiftblade's downward slash had caught Lucius off guard, in a real life-or-death duel, no opponent would stand arrogantly and take a sword blow to the face. From air to landing, there were too many moments to interrupt or dodge, not to mention the alchemy devices on Lucius. To take down that old, wealthy Slytherin would have taken a lot more than a single flashy strike. In short, Hermione had relied on the circumstances of the practical combat class and Lucius's carelessness to gain the advantage. She'd come close to killing him, but it wasn't the invincible feat the gossip made it out to be. Continuous use of the Shining Stone pebbles had also drained a great deal of the Philosopher's Stone energy stored in her staff. She resolved not to use Shining Stone magic again, unless in a true emergency, or unless she could find a way to replenish it. After that class, the image of a first-year girl performing an aerial jump slash on Lucius Malfoy spread like wildfire through the school. Previously, stories about her crippling Draco or confronting Lucius had been hearsay. This time, everyone had seen it. Over 200 students and professors from all four houses had been present. Lucius's hard-earned prestige took a severe hit overnight. Those who could read the situation knew Hermione had not truly been his match. Whether through carelessness or restraint, the fact remained that the dignified head of Slytherin, a professor of advanced counter-wizarding techniques, had been nearly split in half by a first year. Fred and George crowned Hermione Gryffindor Queen, and her nickname Snake Crusher was upgraded, gloriously, to Snake Slayer. Slytherin's hostility toward her intensified, but Hermione didn't much care. She preferred to lose herself in her own world of magic, eating, reading, and attending classes. If there were no fights, she would study, and, ironically, fights always seemed to find her. With the Philosopher's Stone power running short, Hermione focused on other kinds of magic that had fewer restrictions. Gravity magic, which could control flying brooms with elegance, was her top priority. Professor McGonagall also managed to find the second-year textbooks at last and accelerated Hermione's progress, perhaps to prevent another incident. The book turned out to be an old copy that had belonged to a third year named Cedric from Hufflepuff. Cedric's grades had always been excellent. Some students joked he might as well be in Ravenclaw. He was polite and humble, a sheltered, kind soul who hadn't been exposed to much darkness, and Hermione felt he had been well protected by his upbringing. She thanked him sincerely for the textbooks and promised to repay him if she ever could. Second-year material was no longer child's play. Perhaps because the world had grown crueler, the curriculum began to include topics that used to be considered dangerous. Transfiguration of plants and animals, preparation of highly toxic potions, more effective jinxes and curses, and a limited introduction to magic theory. Cedric had marked lines in the book, optional reading, not tested in the final exam. Hermione didn't care about what was optional. The sections on theory were exactly what she needed. If she could quickly materialize the magic of the Forbidden Land, she would greatly improve her chances of survival in that wasteland. She also hoped to borrow ideas from other worlds to invent spells unique to this one. Days passed. Besides class and reading, Hermione joined Harry and Ron on their nightly wanderings. Most nights, they either roamed the towers or visited Hagrid, mostly to ogle his runespore. But the two boys could not resist Hermione's insistence and were dragged into the restricted section of the library several times. Some books that had been declassified in this era were available to lower years, but the truly dangerous ones still required fourth-year status or higher. The volumes that remained in the restricted section seemed almost alive with cold whispers that could unnerve anyone. Ron swore that every time they went in there, he would have nightmares for 3 nights. Hermione, however, remained unfazed. Books whose covers radiated malice became, in her hands, as tame as a scolded bear. She flipped through them, taking in whatever she could without yet having the foundation to learn everything. Mostly she skimmed for ideas she could explore later, and then put the dangerous tomes away like worthless odds and ends. One night, they even broke into Professor Sprout's greenhouse. The door opened easily with Hermione's skilled Alahomora. While the boys admired the giant poisonous tentacles, Hermione snatched 2 white phosphorus flowers and hustled them out before Sprout could appear. Hermione could unlock doors, but she couldn't bypass every magical alarm. No one ever asked Professor Sprout about the white phosphorus flower except Hermione. Though she wasn't caught in the act, Professor Sprout later docked Gryffindor points severely after Hermione entered the classroom with her left foot first. 27. Phantom of the Ringtone. The weather had turned colder, and even inside Hogwarts' protection, one could see endless snowy plains beyond and dark clouds howling across the sky. This was the new normal in the post-war world. Only for a short stretch each year was the surface bearable, and people lived like rats in burrows, burning everything they could to stay warm. If there was any difference from before, it was only that the snow was heavier now and the meltwater less deadly, a possible sign the winter curse was weakening. Hermione sat on the iron fence at the edge of the lawn with her 2 companions, legs swinging. Harry was copying her homework, and Ron was copying Harry's, so the grammar would decline by degrees and make the forgery less obvious to any supervising professor. "Halloween's coming up," Ron said, scratching his head with his quill. "I heard they'll throw a feast as grand as the one at the start of term." "Only wizards celebrate Halloween now, right?" Harry added, glancing at Hermione and helping her explain the holiday. "The Muggles probably don't even see pumpkins anymore." "So will there be ghosts?" Hermione remembered that detail and chewed on a rune spore. "Also, it's been almost 2 months since you found Hagrid. Why is he still recovering? Unless he's eating rune spore instead of medicine, an injury that keeps a half-giant down so long seems odd." "He'd be occupying more of my mother's attention, if you ask me," Harry muttered, messing up his hair. He'd been grounded by Professor Potter again yesterday. "Honestly, I'm not sure anyone could slip past her schedule." "So is Dumbledore coming to Halloween?" Ron asked with a grin. "We haven't overheard our parents' conversations since school started." The 2 boys shrugged. This wasn't the Hogwarts of 50 years ago, when owls flew freely, wizarding newspapers thrived, and curious reporters dug up stories. Students sitting in the castle could then know what was happening in the wider world. Today, Hogwarts was an isolated, warm island. Apart from the supply line from Malfoy Manor, news from the outside rarely reached the students. They had no idea where Dumbledore might be. The conversation tapered off as the 3 watched the castle rise and fall with its steady motion, distant mountains sliding past the horizon. "Where are we now?" Hermione asked. "I don't know. Maybe Eastern Europe? Hogwarts tends to avoid the Middle East," Harry said. "So we went to Chernobyl for wands, then turned around?" "Probably. Most students are still in Europe," Ron said. Hermione didn't know where the settlement she'd lived in with her parents was now located, but it was probably not far from the old Soviet territories. She had no idea how the Grangers had drifted so far from Britain. "Speaking of Eastern Europe, are we close to the Albanian forests?" she asked. "Yeah, that's where the Green Flame Party has its lair," Harry nodded. "Just keeping track of the enemy," Hermione said, narrowing her eyes. She had not forgotten the Death Eater who had broken into the settlement and slaughtered everyone. "Are you planning to go after Lord Voldemort?" Ron's voice went a little high. "Why not?" Hermione said oddly. "Those Death Eaters killed my parents." "You're still too young," Ron protested, scratching his head. "Ron's right," Harry added. "That's someone practically second only to the Dark Lord, someone who can steal things right under Dumbledore's nose. You'd have to grow up a lot to have a chance." "It won't be long," Hermione replied. She felt her magic growing stronger every day. Besides practicing the spells of this world, she was learning to use the gifts she'd taken from the Tarnished. It might not be long before she could stand up to someone like Lucius. As for teachers such as McGonagall and Flitwick, she had no real measure of their full strength. Neither had shown all their cards. Dumbledore had been invisible to them since term began, which made it harder to judge the Dark Lord's standing. Descriptions of the true Dark Lord were vague, making any estimate even less certain. So Hogwarts can sit on his doorstep and Voldemort won't come out to fight Dumbledore? Hermione asked, puzzled. She wanted to know where the limits of power in this world lay. Harry hesitated, not sure whether to laugh or sigh. Hogwarts uses a peculiar kind of magic, something like the Fidelius charm crossed with undetectable extension. He spread his hands. Unless it wants to be seen, even wizards have trouble locating Hogwarts. The places it passes through aren't as large as they appear. Perhaps its footprints are more like a person's. We don't have to worry about stepping on and destroying a Muggle settlement by accident. Hermione sighed and let the question go. I'll still hope for ghosts at Halloween. Hagrid must be hiding something. At the word ghosts, Harry brightened, tossing aside his homework. If there really are ghosts, can my wand hit them? Hermione, have you learned anything to deal with spirits? She tapped her chin. Textbooks don't have much. The restricted section has a few references. She didn't mention the darker knowledge she'd acquired elsewhere. The death magic of the Forbidden Land was highly developed. Summoning vengeful spirits from the other world was a terrifying forbidden art. Legions of undead could pour out, relentlessly pursuing and devouring their targets. If ghosts did exist here, she wondered whether Tibia's call could command them, the way she had once used it in Chernobyl. If she could summon the dead to question them, perhaps she could summon them to fight. She envied the tarnished spirit calling bell, which brought souls up from the ashes to fight by his side. Those varied, powerful spirits had proven useful in nearly any situation. Maybe one day she could forge something similar here. She was thinking this when a sharp, crystalline sound cut through the air. Ding-a-ling. Hermione sat bolt upright. "Did you hear that?" she asked. Harry and Ron exchanged puzzled looks. Hermione was certain she was fine. No fever, no lapse in sanity. Yet she'd heard the bell unmistakably. "What did you hear?" Harry asked. "Professor Potter and Professor McGonagall both suspect you have the Sky Eye. Did you set something off?" Ron sounded excited. Hermione concentrated, but the sound did not return. It was as if the crisp chime had been a momentary illusion. She relaxed and shook her head. "Never mind," she said. "I can't hear it anymore. Let's worry about the Halloween feast." 28. Halloween Horror. The bell in Hermione's head would not let her be. The Halloween feast was every bit as extravagant as the one at the start of term. Pumpkin pie, caramel apples, and gingerbread, unlike any she had tasted before. Malfoy Manor seemed oddly willing to throw money at the holiday, and the Hogwarts kitchens had clearly taken that as license to be creative. House elves shaped cookies into trolls and ghosts, but Hermione scarcely noticed them. She was reveling in her first-ever unlimited dessert spread. Still, that ringing she'd heard all afternoon pulsed in her ears like a nightmare. At first she'd brushed it off, but now it throbbed with a rhythm she couldn't place or locate. She dragged Harry and Ron across the castle, searching for a source, and found nothing. It wasn't until the feast was beginning, urged by Ron to return to the long table and continue her conquest of the table's desserts, that she stopped looking for answers. "If that bell keeps ringing, it'll just sound cheap," Ron muttered. "It can't be anything important." Food in hand and the sound in her ears, Hermione ate like a queen while scanning the Great Hall. Students and professors filled the room, faces alight with smiles. Bats and pumpkins hung everywhere. Even Filch, who usually looked like an old grouch, had on a bat bow tie and watched the students with a faint, unexpected smile, like some dashing vampire count from a novel. Nearby, the Weasley twins were trading gossip. "Did you hear? Draco's been grounded by his father for daydreaming in class," someone jeered. Hermione glanced up. Draco wasn't at the Slytherin table, and old Malfoy's sour face wasn't at the staff table either. Only Professor McGonagall watched the hall with an unusually soft expression. Dumbledore was, as usual, not present. Even Fawkes the Phoenix hadn't come. Maybe Halloween wasn't deemed important enough for him. Then the doors of the Great Hall crashed open. Draco stumbled in, pale and shaking, lips colorless. Ghosts! They're rioting! They're everywhere! He cried. The hall went utterly quiet as everyone turned to him. I, I came out of my father's office, and then he didn't finish. He collapsed. Screams and shouting erupted at once. Hermione felt the ringing in her ears surge, its beat growing frantic. Ghosts? At Hogwarts? Murmurs ran through the room, part excitement, part terror. Silence! Professor McGonagall's voice rang out, magically amplified. Her complexion was unusually white and her expression grave. Pomona, stay and look after the students. Phileas, Lily, come with me. Other professors, patrol the castle. She turned to the students. Prefects, take attendance. Everyone stay in the Great Hall. Do not go out. Wait for my return. Professors hurried from the hall. Professor Sprout, Pomona, directed the students to clear a table and gently laid Draco on it. He's had a ghost pass through him and got the fright of his life, she said, wiping her forehead. He'll be all right. Everyone sit down, please. But the students were far from calm. Even Sprout struggled to keep order. Percy did his best to marshal them, but whispers and plans to sneak off spread through the crowd like wildfire, especially from Fred and George. Hermione's brows knitted. The ringing intensified into something like an alarm, and a coldness seeped down from above, a suffocating, otherworldly chill. Faint, high screams drifted from outside, like the wails of long-dead things. A white shape slithered from the wall and plunged into the hall. Then another, then several, drifting and angling through the air like ragged sheets. Ghosts! A few girls shrieked. Professor Sprout drew her wand and, with a formidable spell, managed to freeze several of them in place. All students, come to me! Hermione watched them closely. Pale, pearlescent bodies, clothing from a bygone era, crinolines and waistcoats, fraying collars. One specter's head hung by only a scrap of skin to its neck, lips pulled back in a feral snarl at the students below. They swooped through the hall, shrieking and tearing at themselves as if in torment. They can pass through walls, someone cried. More ghostly shapes poured through the stone, weaving among the tables with mounting fury. Sprout drove many back with odd wards, but she seemed reluctant to use anything truly destructive. Seventh years, protect your younger classmates, she called, sweat beading on her brow. The ghosts kept coming. Where are the rest of the professors? What on earth are they doing out there? Older students stepped forward, wands raised, but few had experience fighting incorporeal spirits. Many spells simply had no effect. Filch, usually a steady presence, stood with a rigid, determined face and did not draw a wand. He physically placed himself between the ghosts and the younger pupils. Then the ringing in Hermione's head exploded into a shriek. A gust of icy wind swept through the hall and extinguished every floating candle. Darkness fell like a blanket. A deep, distant boom shook the castle as if something massive had struck it. Children screamed. In the blackness, the pale ghosts glowed all the more horribly. One specter broke through the line of older students and the professor's wards and passed straight through the chest of a Hufflepuff boy. Frost spread across his skin like a white bloom, and he crumpled to the floor. He was lucky. His constitution meant frostbite hadn't set in, but he was far from well. If it happened again, it could kill him. Get away from that child, Sprout barked. But a dozen ghosts swarmed around her wrists and shoulders, winding like ropes and preventing her from lifting a wand. 29. Deathfire. In the darkness, the ghosts' high-pitched screams were especially terrifying. Professor Sprout's protective wards were on the verge of collapse, and the swirling phantoms grew more frenzied by the second. Burst forth, spirit fire, Hermione commanded. Her voice was steady. As she struck the tip of her staff to the floor, the centipede wound mark of the death rune appeared, something never seen in this world before. A pale flame erupted, raw and fierce, like molten lava, swallowing the nearest ghosts while miraculously passing harmlessly around the students. One blood-smeared specter with a contorted face brushed the pale fire and let out a scream that was worse than before, scrabbling back into the crowd of ghosts and thrashing as it tried in vain to put the flame out. It was visibly weakened. Spirit fire, before the appearance of the golden tree, was the flame used to baptize the dead. The dread deathbird was its guardian. This was the fire of death, necessary for crossing the veil, a baptism for those who moved on, and the most terrible punishment for those who lingered. The other phantoms sensed that terror and fled before the flames even touched them. The fires landed in an irregular ring around the students, forming a protective barrier. Hermione picked up a ball of the pale flame on the tip of her staff and held it aloft like a torch. The light cut through the gloom. She turned toward the figures still pressing in on Professor Sprout and said coldly, "Leave or die." In that moment, she spoke for death itself. If the dead could not find their own way, she would force it for them. The ghosts circling Sprout recoiled, shrieking, and drifted back into the air. The herbology professor, now free, looked at Hermione with astonishment and worry. "Be careful, child. Don't hurt them. They aren't usually like this." Sprout stammered. Around them, other students were reacting too, lighting wands until a forest of lumos filled the great hall. Hermione kept her staff burning, the spirit fire holding the ghosts at bay, and asked, "Professor, what's happening with these ghosts? Were they here at Hogwarts before?" Sprout hesitated, then said, "They're people who once died at Hogwarts. Because they couldn't decide to move on, they remained in the world." "But no one had seen them," Harry said, puzzled. Not even seventh years, or so it had seemed, had ever seen ghosts like these. Sprout sighed. "They usually have a task to complete, so they don't appear lightly. There used to be many ghosts in the world. Where wizards died in fitting places, they could choose whether to move on. But since things changed, many chose release." She glanced at the ghosts hanging in the air, fierce and unwilling. "The ghosts of Hogwarts bear a heavy duty. They are unable or unwilling to pass." "So why attack us?" Ron asked, still shaking from nearly being grabbed by a ghost whose head dangled under its neck. "Perhaps something is affecting them," Hermione said, narrowing her eyes. She realized the ringing in her ears had stopped, and the chill that had seeped down from above her head had lifted. At that moment, a giggle was heard from outside, and a round, mischievous ghost slid through the wall with an unpleasant cackle. Unlike the rest, he seemed to have a stronger hold on the waking world. He could flip plates, lift pitchers into the air, and hurl them down. "Peeves!" Sprout cried. But the poltergeist paid no heed. "Even Peeves is affected?" Sprout's frown deepened. "He's coming," Hermione warned, raising her staff. Peeves drifted toward the students, provoked rather than frightened by the pale fire Hermione had conjured. Hermione gathered herself. If a small ball of spirit fire didn't deter him, she would wait and unleash a larger one when he got closer. The two held in a tense standoff until a phoenix's cry rang out through the castle. "It's Dumbledore! Dumbledore's back!" Relief washed over the hall. Professors and students visibly relaxed. A few of the younger children cheered. At the sound, the ghosts seemed to stagger out of whatever madness gripped them. They looked around blankly, glanced at the students below, and then, as if pulled by an unseen current, rose toward the rafters and slipped away through the ceiling, gone from sight. "Everyone, return to your seats. Professor McGonagall will be with you shortly," Sprout said, wiping her brow and exhaling in relief. The spirit fires around Hermione winked out one by one as she tapped her staff, leaving no scorch marks on table or floor. The students stared at her with new curiosity. The phantoms that had even older students worried had been driven off by this girl's flames. Those pale, utterly cold fires were clearly a ghost's natural enemy. "Hey, Hermione, what spell was that?" George leaned over, eyes wide. "Pale flames, so cool." Fred nodded eagerly. Hermione, between mouthfuls of pumpkin pudding, said casually, "Spirit fire. It's the flame that baptizes souls crossing into death." "It's never in any book or in the library," Percy said, solemnly analytical. "You did once rebound a killing curse. This shows you must have some special connection to death." Hermione let them speculate. She thought, fleetingly, about the Weasley presence in Gryffindor. In a house with only a few dozen students across 7 years, there were Weasleys in the 1st, 3rd, and 5th years, and 2 older brothers, Bill and Charlie, already graduated, and little Ginny coming in next year. In a world stripped bare, the ever-busy Mrs. Weasley seemed almost heroic. While Hermione mulled this over, Professor McGonagall re-entered the Great Hall with the other teachers. They looked tired and disordered, no doubt having dealt with trouble elsewhere. Lucius Malfoy followed at the back of the group, looking haggard. He had probably been besieged by ghosts in his office. His face was especially sour when he caught sight of Draco, who had been unconscious after an attack, and he glared around like an irritated serpent. Hogwarts itself began to move again, shuddering and settling as the castle continued its ceaseless journey. Hermione, however, had other priorities. Before McGonagall could formally close the feast, Hermione was already loading more sweets into her mouth. Comfort and pudding were, for now, far more important than any announcement. 30. Divination Professor. You said you heard a continuous ringing? Professor McGonagall asked the small girl in front of her, surprised. It was the day after the Halloween attack. Hermione had come to her after class. Divination isn't a required subject until third year, but perhaps you should meet Professor Trelawney now. McGonagall paused, thinking. The string of unusual perceptions had all but confirmed Hermione's sky eye ability. There was no point in stunting a gifted student's development because of the usual curriculum. Does prophecy really exist? Hermione asked, curious. She didn't think her gift was so much about peering into the future as about sensing things others couldn't detect. Of course, though it's hard for people to accept, McGonagall said, as if remembering someone. There have been many famous seers in history. Most of them met a tragic end, and some even brought catastrophe. She sighed. Sybil is not like them, but she has suffered too. McGonagall shook her head. Come on, we're going to the North Tower. It was Hermione's first time inside the divination classroom. When Harry and his friends had roamed at night, the room had always been closed, so she had never been up there before. A fourth-year divination class had just finished. Students drifted down the spiral staircase, rubbing their temples and complaining. Help, why did I choose this subject? Is Professor Trelawney even fit to teach? The goblin's eternal winter curse destroyed the foundations of the world. In the decades after the war, no genuine prophet has been born. Maybe we don't need this class. Why are we being taught vision by a blind woman? It's ridiculous. They grumbled, their dissatisfaction clear. But the moment they saw McGonagall at the bottom of the stairs, they immediately shut up. The headmistress shot them a few sharp looks and led Hermione into the classroom. Hermione finally saw Professor Trelawney. Her long hair was a tangle, a dirty strip of cloth covered her eyes. Astonishing burn marks ran from her eye sockets across her cheeks and forehead, and fine grains of sand sifted continuously from beneath the bandage. She wore layer upon layer of heavy wool, all covered in odd beads and sequins. In warm Hogwarts, it seemed absurdly overdone, but she appeared terrified of the cold. Two small braziers burned beside her, spitting faint blue smoke that wrapped around her like a shawl. Oh, Minerva, you're here. Yes, I saw it. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have looked. It's so cold. Would you top up my sherry? She said in a voice that ramblingly wandered between emphasis and haze. The fourth year's complaints made sense in an instant. Trelawney's speech was chaotic and breathy, her sentences exaggerated and disjointed. McGonagall crossed the room, poured a cup from a bottle on the floor, and handed it to her. Sybil, this is a student. Trelawney wriggled, her bracelets and beads clinking, then turned and fixed Hermione with her masked gaze. Ah, yes, a student, a new student, a first-year little thing, fluffy and troublesome. She will knock over my bottle. Oh, how terrifying. I'm willing to use tinfoil wrapping to keep her away. McGonagall intervened. This is Hermione. Recent events indicate she may have the sky eye. I thought you should see her. Trelawney shivered, appearing for a moment more lucid. The smell of alcohol receded a little as she accepted McGonagall's cup and drained it. How rare, she murmured. After the war for decades, I thought I was the only seer. Now you say there's a second one. Soon you may not need me. Sand continued to sift from beneath her blindfold, gathering on her clothing. Come, child, give me your hand. Let me see if you live up to your name. Something in Trelawney's words made Hermione think of the witches from the Forbidden Forest who hurled themselves into fiendfire, eyes consumed, ravenous for other people's sight. Hermione stepped forward and offered her hand. Trelawney took it, fingers heavy with bracelets and rings. Hermione said, I don't really think of myself as a sky eye. I can see things that have already happened, but I don't think I can see the future. You are wrong, child. Second sight is not only seeing the future. Trelawney exhaled, her voice suddenly airy and intense. She trembled as if struck. Hermione, holding her hand, felt the seer startle and twinge, as if an electric current had passed through. She inhaled reflexively and breathed in some of the blue smoke. In the next instant, her vision shifted. She saw herself standing in darkness before a large crystal ball that glowed a strange, sickly green. A younger Trelawney stood behind it. Her eyes were perfectly normal and magnified behind thick, round glasses. She peered intently into the crystal ball, mouthing words like a litany. The world's future, eternal winter and fiendfire, the dawn of hope, sky eye, give me revelation. Her posture grew more and more otherworldly, as if she were lifting out of herself. She leaned closer until her face nearly touched the glass. Abruptly, the crystal ball unleashed a destructive green flare. Hermione shut her eyes. A high-pitched scream filled her ears. When she opened them, she saw Trelawney convulsing on the floor, cradling her own eyes. A dizzy, weightless sensation washed over Hermione, and then she was back in the divination classroom, facing McGonagall's slightly worried expression. Trelawney panted, then returned to something like composure, even ordinariness. "You saw it, little thing. You did. You truly are a sky eye." Her voice carried a complex mixture of regret and awe. "I peered where I should not have, stuck my eyes into a fire to roast them. Apollo punished his prophet, but he also scattered her life like sand. Sky eye, yes, sky eye, you are different. Both the foreseer and the afterknower are sky eyes." She turned to McGonagall. "We are Prometheus's blessed ones. Those who look forward forget what's beneath their feet and fall into the abyss." And then Trelawney fixed Hermione with a patient, peculiar look. "She is a child of Epimetheus. Hindsight. Everything that has happened cannot escape her eyes. She is the root of lessons, of regret and wisdom, the sort who ought to have survived the great flood. Ah, she is a stiff, non-drinking block of wood. The smell of brass makes me queasy. If she takes divination with me, I'll have to put sound-filtering earplugs in the windows." Hermione realized the professor was sliding back into nonsense. She snatched her hand free and, more to steady herself than out of malice, nudged the sherry bottle, sending it tipping to the floor. "You forgot your tinfoil wrapping," she said flatly. Trelawney only shook her head serenely. "Cruel? No. Undoubtedly, she is a sky eye. Compared with our rare, unstable flashes, the hindsight's gaze settles more easily. She will enter second sight often. That's useful. It will help you find many hidden dangers." McGonagall's eyes sharpened. "So the ringing you heard, it's inside the school," Hermione said with certainty. "I'll organize patrols." "Sybil, now that Hermione's sky eye has been confirmed, can you instruct her?" Trelawney, her hands trembling with something like nervous habit, restored the upended bottle with a flick of magic and shook her head. "I cannot. Just as a spindle cannot weave brocade and a smith cannot make a plow, my experience is not suited to her. And she has already kicked over my bottle. This will not be the last time." Hermione inwardly drew back the foot she had been tempted to extend. She did not like this eccentric woman, but she appreciated Trelawney's blunt honesty. As she left the tower, she murmured to herself, "Fiendfire. Is it one of the forces that destroyed this world? I wonder how it differs from ordinary fire." 31. Overheard secrets. "So you really are a sky eye," Ron said, grinning. "Hindsight. I mean, you can't predict the future, but that's still awesome." He spread his arms and spun like a king on a small stage. "So the ringing you heard yesterday, someone must have been up to no good." Harry frowned. He couldn't imagine who would do such a thing. Could it be Lord Voldemort breaking in again? We're so close to Albania. He blurted the thought and was startled by it. Professor McGonagall's already had patrols beefed up. "I'll try wandering the castle more, see if I can trigger the sky eye again." Hermione shoved the essay she'd just finished into her bag and swatted Ron's hand away as it drifted over. "Write it yourself first. If you really can't manage, then come find me." She sounded more irritated than usual. She still couldn't figure out where the sky eye ability came from. Maybe it was a strong perception attribute. This world didn't show ability values the way the Forbidden Land did, so she had no way of checking. In the Forbidden Land, she'd been a finger witch with high perception to begin with. Perhaps in this world, those qualities combined and produced a unique talent. If so, maybe she could try magic that stacked unusual status effects. She'd been eyeing that Tarnished's bleed and dual-wield playstyle for a while. The Halloween incident had blown up quickly. Aside from a terrified Draco and an unlucky Hufflepuff, No one else had been harmed, and attention had immediately turned to Hermione's dramatic entrance. Every corridor echoed with questions about her pale ghost fire, what it was, where the ghosts came from, what they were like. The professors, however, remained tight-lipped. No matter how much the students asked, they learned nothing useful. Dumbledore's Phoenix made frequent patrols across the grounds, which calmed the students somewhat and only increased rumors about the spirit fire. George and Fred Weasley even produced cheap replicas of Hermione's pale flames. They matched the color and brightness, but had no destructive power, and that didn't stop pupils from running the halls brandishing them. The worst backlash came from Lucius Malfoy. He had launched a relentless campaign of venomous whispers and hostility, an attack of words so saturated it reached everyone, even the younger Slytherins. At the same time, professors had to give up more of their free time to patrol in pairs, including more frequent night rounds. The trio found themselves dodging professors whenever they went to visit Hagrid. If Hermione hadn't been alert, they would have been caught long ago. Hagrid, though, was unchanged. He still sat in the cave at the end of the secret passage, gnawing on Runespore and petting Fang. Hermione couldn't help it any longer and asked, "Hagrid, how long have you been recovering? Why does it feel like you haven't improved at all?" Hagrid, who'd been listening to Ron's boasting, paused and looked unsure. Hermione pressed on. "And Aragog, he was supposed to come back. It's been ages. Why hasn't he?" Hagrid scratched his head irritably. "Sorry, Hermione, but a whole lot of things aren't proper to tell yet. You only need to know I'm fine, and Aragog's fine. That's enough." "What about the ghosts?" Hermione asked. Ron and Harry looked at Hagrid expectantly. Hagrid's expression hardened. "I told you, stop asking. I can't tell you." He sounded furious. Even sitting down, his bulk was intimidating. Harry and Ron quieted, a little scared, but Hermione wasn't. She could tell Hagrid was bluffing. He wanted to frighten them off. She leaned on him a different way. "Professor Sprout said those ghosts bear a heavy mission," Hermione said earnestly. "Hagrid, I just found out I have the Sky Eye. How rare is it? I'm the only one in 50 years since the war. Even if you don't tell me now, I might be walking around the castle someday, see something, turn a corner, and end up led into some dangerous ghost lair and die without knowing why." She looked at him with concern. "So you have to tell me something. At least tell me what's safe and what I shouldn't look at." Hagrid was taken aback. He stood there for a long moment, trying to find a way to answer, clearly uncomfortable. "I don't think that's possible. The ghosts, they're good folk, normally. They are." He said it loud and clumsy. "What happened on Halloween was an accident. The professors are investigating. You lot should put your minds at ease and study hard." He tried to change the subject. "And Christmas. You lot haven't spent Christmas at school yet. Different experience. Oh, and right, the corridor on the right side of the 4th floor is a forbidden land. Folks been curious. I'll have a wander around there myself. Might find someat." Hermione clapped her hands as if enlightened, which made a vein in Hagrid's forehead throb. He huffed like a boiling kettle. She wasn't actually going to go off looking for trouble. She wasn't like the Weasley twins, reckless for fun. Before she could say more, she froze. "Quiet," she whispered. The others followed her lead. Hermione slipped the invisibility cloak over them, covering all three. Someone's coming. Panic hit them. The only people who would come to Hagrid after hours were professors. If they were caught past curfew, there'd be punishment. Footsteps approached. Light spilled into the cave. "It's Mum and Professor McGonagall," Harry groaned inwardly. Professor Potter, Lily, with her deep red hair, walked in carrying a basket, accompanied by Professor McGonagall with a lantern. Their eyes immediately went to the 3 little bowls set out before Hagrid, left there earlier in the rush. Hagrid hadn't thought to put them away. "You 3 again?" Lily said as if she'd expected it. "Ah, yes, they came for some tea and runespore," Hagrid said, rubbing the back of his neck. Ron mouthed, "They already knew." Hermione rolled her eyes. Hagrid had a terrible time keeping secrets. He was a soft spot, but the professors didn't seem overly worried. "This is against school rules, you know," McGonagall said warily. "Tell them to come less often." "I told James not to give Harry the invisibility cloak," Lily's eyes flashed. "I'll deal with both of them properly when summer comes." Hermione and Ron gave Harry a look that said, "You're on your own." Hagrid wiped his brow and tried to change subject. Everything all right outside? The professors have been tired, Lily said, handing Hagrid a sequence of potions from her basket. Drink this first, then finish this one in one go, and finally this bottle after you've eaten. Hagrid took them skillfully, popping one open and downing it. Also, that forbidden land on the 4th floor, that needs extra patrolling. I heard students are very curious. McGonagall nodded. Don't worry about the castle. Worry about you here. Hagrid laughed heartily. What could happen to me? I'm a half-giant. Look at me. Won't be long before I can go out and help Dumbledore again. Lily's face softened, but she still sighed. The outside world's a mess. Someone's infiltrated the school. That Halloween incident came too close. If it had been later, the ghosts might have completely lost control. We're prepared now, Hagrid said quickly, glancing toward where the three were hiding. Similar situations won't happen again, right? McGonagall put a hand on his arm. Hagrid's right. We are the best school of magic. Have confidence, Lily. Lily nodded. At least Dumbledore is still here. That makes me feel a lot safer. It's getting late. You two should get back and rest. You have classes tomorrow, Hagrid announced, speaking as much to the invisible trio as to the professors. There was nothing more to learn, so Hermione draped the cloak back over them, and they slipped away. Back in their dormitory, they finally relaxed, collapsing into chairs. That was too close, Ron said, patting his chest as if he'd just escaped death. Good thing Hermione's ears are sharp. They already knew we were out past curfew to see Hagrid, Harry said glumly. My mum's not going to let me off this summer. Hermione sat silent for a moment, sorting through what she'd overheard. She put the pieces together. The forbidden land on the 4th floor wasn't directly related to the Halloween incident. An outsider had infiltrated the school, and the ghosts were normally benevolent, but had been driven out of control by someone. Only she had heard the bell-like sound the night before, so it made sense to infer that the bell signified the outsider. The bell's influence caused the ghosts to lose control. The ghosts were concentrated somewhere tied to an important duty, and the outsider's plan involved making them lose control to achieve some goal. The good news was the outsider hadn't succeeded yet, and the professors had increased vigilance. The bad news was the outsider had not been found and still had whatever caused the bell sound, leaving the professors at a disadvantage. For now, Hermione concluded, there's nothing to do but wait and see if the bell rings again. Fine, Ron said. We've got classes tomorrow. After shooing the two boys away, Hermione climbed into bed and tried to sleep, her mind busy with possibilities. The bell's echo seemed to fade from the school. The outsider had picked up the professor's vigilance and gone into hiding. Hermione gradually stopped worrying about it and threw herself back into her studies. In fact, while Muggles are researching how to use nuclear weapons to wipe out wizards, wizards ourselves are beginning to study the power at the nucleus, Professor Flitwick said, perched on a stack of books. He manipulated a small blue light with his wand to illustrate his point. How to control and use this destructive power is one of the foremost research topics in the wizarding world today. This radiation pollution, which has spread across the globe, will be a lingering problem for centuries to come. Of course, he added, with radiation's effects on the human body, the likelihood of newborns exhibiting radiation-based abilities is increasing year by year. All eyes turned to Hermione. She had demonstrated the ability to emit radiation-like energy before coming to school. That's right. Miss Granger might be an example of someone born with this kind of power, Flitwick said with a smile. Hermione nodded, though she knew she wasn't truly born with it. A small ball of starlight condensed in her palm. But Professor, I haven't had any formal magic education before, so my understanding of this power might be different from the mainstream. Flitwick's interest sharpened. He widened his eyes. Tell me, Miss Granger. I think this brilliance comes from the cosmos, she said. It's the stars' power manifesting here on Earth. Malfoy sneered immediately. He had begun testing his boundaries again, emboldened by Hermione's reluctance to answer her every insult with a duel. Flitwick, however, was lost in thought, stroking his silver-gloved chin. Oh, from that angle, it's not wrong. Muggles believe stars glow because of nuclear fusion. if we explain a wizard's power in idealist terms as an external manifestation of celestial phenomena. He muttered to himself for a moment. The first years looked baffled. Finally, he snapped back. Oh, sorry, children. I may have wandered beyond the syllabus. You don't have to take notes on that part. Then he turned to Hermione with a smile. If you're willing, write up your magic and your ideas in a paper. I'll help you publish it in post-war spell research. You should know you're currently the only documented case, and both your magic and your person are valuable to research. Hermione startled. You won't dissect me, will you? Flitwick paused and then laughed. You might become the pioneer of radiation magic. In time, you may have a statue in the square. Hermione considered it. In a world badly damaged by radiation, if her shining stone magic could be understood and shared, it might accelerate recovery and help restore what had been lost. As for the danger of unscrupulous people learning it, she wasn't worried. If anyone could surpass her, an old witch from a remote forbidding place, after only a few years of study, then those people would be fearsome no matter what they learned. All right, she said after a moment. I'll try to put it into a conceptual paper. I'll likely be pestering you often, Professor. Flitwick's eyes curved into crescents at the words. The prestige of having a student discovered as the founder of a new branch of magic was a heady prospect. Charms ended that morning. In the afternoon came the aggravating practical on reversal of anti-wizard techniques, taught with theatrical fury by Lucius. He wore a long face, as if the entire class owed him a fortune. I'll say it again, the anti-death cloak is not 100% effective. 99.96% is not 100%. If anyone can't manage a proper tactical role in the next practical and tries to get out of it by wearing the anti-death cloak, I'll let them taste the killing curse myself, he barked, pounding the table. Hermione had noticed how sour Lucius had been since term began. Where he had once been merely arrogant, he now seemed to be lashing out in self-destructive fits. Death. Revere death, understand? The killing curse is still the pinnacle of offensive evil curses. Don't treat it like child's play. Once you go to the other side, you can never come back, he intoned, trying to terrify them. Professor. What about ghosts? Draco put up his hand. Do ghosts count as going to the other side? It wasn't only Hermione's trio who were curious about ghosts, the other students were too. Draco in particular had been tormented by them before. If anyone else had asked, they might have been scolded, but Lucius indulged his son. Ghosts don't count, he said. They aren't living, but neither have they truly gone beyond. They stayed here because they lacked the courage to move on, or because of unfinished business or deep grudges. Because of that, they have enormous weaknesses. Weaknesses? Draco looked confused. But they seem powerful. Most magic can't hurt them. They're already dead. They can't die again. They fly, pass through walls, and vanish. They're impossible to guard against. Even the professors don't have many good solutions. That's only because you haven't found the right method, Lucius snapped, then warmed to his theme. And those professors, out of some misguided pity for ghosts, they refuse to use the correct magic. Then how can the problem be solved? He stamped his cane and sneered. Ghosts are cowards who cheat death. They're like clam meat without a shell. Fragile and foolish. Their minds are trapped in an extremely narrow domain. They aren't living, but they aren't truly dead either. If you harden your heart and hit a ghost with the killing curse, they'll have even less resistance than a living person. Death will claim them instantly. One could compare them to Miss Granger's white flames, piped up a clever little imp at the wrong moment. Lucius shot him a fierce glare. Of course, some people are born with odd little tricks, he went on with an affected air. In this new era, it's not surprising for young wizards to manifest unusual talents, but individual talent, if it isn't made public, is at best a flash in the pan. Even if your so-called pale flames represent death like the killing curse, their usefulness to the public is far less than that of the killing curse itself. Something in Lucius's tone made Hermione uneasy. He seemed to be forcing his words. If someone truly wishes to serve the public, they should write their magic down, make it known, let people learn it, he said, trailing off as if suggesting possibilities. That way, if ghosts riot again, we won't have another Halloween disaster. Hermione immediately sensed his motive. He wanted access to her spiritual fire. Professor Flitwick's interest had been genuine. He wanted to understand and popularize a way to control radiation. Lucius, however, saw opportunity. There weren't that many real, persistent ghost problems in the wizarding world, and some countermeasures already existed. He was using rhetoric to push her into revealing this unknown power publicly. She snorted inwardly. The owner of vast Malfoy Manor was coveting a child's treat. "Thank you for your concern," she said, measured and cool, "but I'm busy writing Professor Flitwick's paper. I doubt I'll have time for anything else for a while." 33. I'm doing research in the magic world. Daily arguments with Lucius did nothing to dampen Hermione's mood. She threw herself into finishing her paper on Shining Stone magic. November passed in a blur of peaceful, if intense, work. Inside Hogwarts, it felt like spring, but outside the wind had turned to ice and driven every surface creature underground. December in this world felt apocalyptic. Hermione remembered how, as a child, every winter, her family huddled in deep caves with stored provisions, sometimes getting lucky enough to dig up a hibernating snake, frog, or mouse that had burrowed wrong and make a feast out of it. Now, sitting by a warm fireplace, Hermione frowned as she tried to render the knowledge in her head into the formats Professor Flitwick required. It wasn't easy. Anything humans devised to confound other humans was 100 times trickier than the puzzles of nature. She had to follow the post-war spell research journal's standards to the letter, lay out theories section by section, cite sources, annotate in the right places. But how could she cite the conclusions of Full Moon Queen Renala? How could she openly write, "Hereby paying homage to the origin sorcerer Lusat"? Many inexplicable passages could only be glossed over with phrases like "an innate sensation" or "a certain ineffable intuition." That made Flitwick uneasy. This sort of hand-waving would surely fail close scrutiny. Hermione kept running to the charms classroom, bringing her ideas to the professor. Flitwick would understand what she meant and help translate her foreign concepts into the language of their world. The arrangement accelerated Hermione's mastery of local magical theory, and Flitwick, never one to hide his delight, was impressed by the girl's uncanny grasp of magic, not realizing it was a distillation of countless geniuses from another world. Regarding those three theories, you can find references in the library's A Brief Analysis of Triphasics, Aldi's Secrets and Echoes of Magic, issue 13, the half-goblin professor said with a smile. Cite them in your paper, and you'll give your theory a solid foundation. The exchanges benefited them both. Flitwick enjoyed the intellectual challenge as much as the student did. "Thank you, Professor," Hermione said genuinely. Without Flitwick's patient help, she might never have gotten the paper off the ground. On the way to the library, Harry and Ron suddenly appeared at her side. "Hermione, it's impossible to catch you these days," Ron complained. "You vanish as soon as class ends. We've been looking for you forever," Harry added. Hermione had been so busy with her paper that she hadn't joined their night excursions in weeks. Ever since Harry knew his mother, Professor Lily, had found out about the invisibility cloak, he'd been cautious. No one wanted to stumble into Mrs. Potter's crosshairs. Lily still acted kindly and unsuspecting for the moment, but Harry couldn't promise her patience would last, especially with Christmas on the horizon. Still, the two boys looked like they'd been holding themselves back for far too long. "What do you two want?" Hermione asked. "I'm working on Flitwick's paper. I won't have much free time before Christmas." They led her out to the courtyard garden, and seeing no one around, Harry's eyes lit up. "I overheard Mum and Professor McGonagall talking. They're planning something big and will be tied up until Christmas." "So?" Hermione said. Whatever the professors were doing had nothing to do with them. Hermione had her own deadlines. Ron breathed out. "That means they won't be watching us as much." Harry grinned. "Perfect time for a night excursion." Hermione slapped her forehead. "So you've been watching the professors' schedules just to go off on night adventures?" "Is there any other reason?" Ron asked, puzzled. Hermione sighed. "Where do you even plan to go? Haven't you had enough of Hagrid's rune spore?" Harry brightened. "Didn't you say before you wanted to check the restricted corridor on the right side of the 4th floor?" Hermione stared. Did Gryffindor courage incarnate just speak? She'd only mentioned it to tease Hagrid, not as a serious plan. "I was joking, trying to scare Hagrid." You two actually intend to go? We weren't originally, Harry said, but then we thought of your white flame. Yeah, Ron added. Even if we meet ghosts, you can scare them off with that flame. We'll just go take a look, Harry tempted. Don't you want to know what's on the 4th floor? Where did all those ghosts go? Hermione snapped back, exasperated. Fine, we'll put on the invisibility cloak. You two will hold the spirit flame up, and we'll charge straight in. Your mother will be waiting inside with a cauldron, catching you like sitting ducks and cooking you up into a pot of toilet cleaner. Harry hesitated. Surely it won't be that bad? They're busy, aren't they? Hermione lowered her voice. Then at least find out what they're busy with. Hagrid already warned them to keep an eye on the 4th floor. I don't believe they'll be so distracted that they can't spare any patrols. After shooing off the two overly enthusiastic boys, Hermione hugged her stack of notes and headed for the library. She knew she couldn't explain all of Shining Stone magic in one paper, nor did she intend to make every witch and wizard an origin-level sorcerer. Her goal was modest, to introduce the basic theories, how to condense radiative power, how to operate safely and efficiently, and to present 2 simple, mature spells, Shining Stone Pebbles and Starlight. Those 2 were the basic tricks even the clumsiest sorcerers in the Forbidden Land could learn. Whether Shining Stone magic would flourish here, branching into schools like the academies at Raya Lucaria, or quietly become one spell among many, Hermione didn't much care. She had too many kinds of magic in reserve, each had its own brilliant future. That quiet study didn't last long. In the evening, still working by lamplight in the common room, Hermione looked up to find Harry and Ron bursting in, panting, faces flushed, eyes bright with excitement. They clustered around her desk. "We know what the professors are planning," Ron blurted. "It's huge," Harry added. Hermione looked from one to the other and felt a fresh wave of headache coming on. 34. Professors' Initiatives. They're going to rescue a group of children. Harry blurted, trying to keep his voice down despite his excitement. "Slow down. What's going on?" Hermione asked, completely bewildered. "Ron and I snuck into her room under the invisibility cloak while Mum was teaching and found a letter she wrote to Dad." Harry gripped the edge of the table, unable to hide his agitation. "Are you two trying to get yourselves killed?" Hermione stared at them, shocked. "That's not the point." Ron's eyes went wide. "We're in Romania now, right near the Green Flame Party's stronghold. The Order of the Phoenix found out that a group of children the Death Eaters kidnapped earlier this year haven't been harmed and are being held somewhere in Romania. The Order's short-handed, so they need professors to help with the rescue. The letter said that my mum, Professor McGonagall, and almost all the powerful professors are being sent. That'll leave only Quirrell, Professor Firenze, and a few others guarding the school. In fact, Professor McGonagall's leaving tonight to meet the Order in advance." They talked over one another until Hermione finally understood. Voldemort had been snatching students from Hogwarts every year. It seemed he didn't always kill them outright. Some were kept alive for a while. Now, at Dumbledore's request, an undercover member of the Order embedded in the Green Flame Party had sent word of where the children were being held, and a rescue was being organized. "Mundungus is a proper hero," Ron declared loudly, referring to the undercover agent. "He can blend in with a bunch of lunatics and still send messages. He must be bold, meticulous, brave, clever, way cleverer than my dad." Harry nodded. "At least stronger than my dad." Hermione frowned at their thought process. "Aren't you worried? Your parents are going on this, aren't they?" But the 2 boys were brimming with excitement and confidence in their parents. They didn't see the operation as dangerous, only as a sure victory. "We've got the greatest white wizard in the world," Harry said dreamily. "Doing what's right. Overcoming evil is bound to happen." Ron cheered. "It's a pity I'm still too young," Harry added. "I'd show those dark wizards what my wand can do." He swung his fist and the chain flail at his waist clattered. He had adapted to its weight well enough that he'd even cast a levitation charm on it so it wouldn't slow him down while running and jumping. Hermione reflected for a moment. "So a lot of the professors, at least the powerful ones, will be gone for a while. At least until Christmas," Ron guessed. "They want the rescued children to have a warm Christmas." Hermione did the math, about 20 days. not short. What about Dumbledore? Is he going? The letter didn't say, but he should be going to keep an eye on Voldemort. Who else could match him? Ron shrugged. Harry's eyes lit up. We should plan when to explore the restricted area on the fourth-floor corridor. Hermione's thick essay landed on his face. Use your brains, which are apparently full of cockroach milk and frog legs, she said, trying to sound stern as the paper slid off. This might not be as simple as you think. The Halloween ghost riot still hasn't had its true culprit found, and whoever makes that bell sound is still loose in the school. With that going on, would the professors really all go rushing off? Oh my goodness, knowledge can't get into my head lying like that, Harry complained, rubbing his face. Ron faltered. Maybe? Do the professors think the culprit won't know they're leaving? Hermione only smiled at them. Anyone who could move freely about the school, who had considerable magic and could control ghosts, wouldn't they notice the professors' movements? This is a school. Professors aren't spies. Their routines are plain and predictable. Even patrols run on schedules. Under such conditions, not only an unknown lurker, but even students could spot the gaps. I think the professors are fishing, Hermione said. Huh? Fishing? You mean pretending to go out, but really waiting for the lurker to take the bait? Harry said, as understanding dawned. Are you saying the rescue is fake? Ron asked, disappointed. Not fake, Hermione shook her head. But the timing might be delayed. Catch the mole first, then rescue the children. That's just a guess, Harry protested. Hermione rolled her eyes. Whether it's a guess or not isn't the point. If there's even a chance of it, you need to be ready to end up drinking your mum's rust remover in the fourth-floor corridor. Harry shivered, picturing the scene. The two boys went back to bed sullenly, muttering to one another, not fully convinced. Hermione, however, couldn't get back to her essay. She straightened the paper she'd messed up and thought. As sensible as anyone could be, she didn't believe the professors would be reckless enough to ignore a threat inside the school and rush off to a prison break. After the Halloween incident, when Dumbledore and the Order hadn't appeared in time, she wasn't as starry-eyed about the greatest white wizard as she used to be. She preferred to rely on her sky-eye ability to gather some reliable information. That ability was useful for looking back, but useless for things that hadn't happened yet. It could only wait for the other side to act. This particular lurker, however, seemed patient enough that the professors might have to bait him first. The professors did move quickly. The next morning at breakfast, Professor Sprout announced that Professor McGonagall had taken leave and that Transfiguration would be covered by Sprout and Professor Flitwick for the next few lessons. Hermione felt a prick of confirmation. The announcement was almost too deliberate, as if they were making sure the other party knew McGonagall had left. Do they already suspect who the culprit is? She wondered. The announcement gave her an idea. She patted Harry and Ron, and while shoveling breakfast into her mouth, said casually, "Let's go for a night walk tonight." Harry froze for a moment, then brightened. To explore the fourth floor? Maybe, Hermione replied. We'll decide tonight. She wanted to test her theory. If she was right, there would be movement tonight. Some kind of reaction, at least. 35. Night exploration for Harry and Ron. The day had dragged on longer than usual. Even Professor Flitwick's Transfiguration class, charming as it was, couldn't hold their attention. Both boys kept thinking about the invisibility cloak. By evening, they had barely eaten, shoveling down a few extra pies to guard against a late-night rumble in their bellies. Hermione, on the other hand, stayed in the common room, methodically finishing her homework. Lately, her life had been overflowing. Lessons, extra study of the second-year textbooks, and, most importantly, finishing her thesis on Shining Stone magic. The textbooks were nearly done, and the thesis was in its final stages, so she finally allowed herself to think about other things, like a midnight adventure with the two griffins. The trio had planned to play wizard's chess until late, but the pieces could not tolerate their careless moves and staged a strike. Instead, they hovered around Hermione's desk, whispering, nudging her, and drawing disapproving glances from upper-year students. They waited in that state until lights out. Then, pretending to return to their dormitories, the three slipped out and met again in the common room. With most students asleep, They didn't have to worry about waking anyone. "Now, shouldn't you tell us where we're going?" Harry asked, hopeful. "Aren't we going to the fourth floor? That's the only place worth going in this whole castle," Ron complained, unwilling to give up. Hermione didn't really know where to go either. The fourth floor, Dumbledore's forbidden area, was an obvious focal point, and most people assumed the intruder's target was there. But the intruder had never made his purpose clear. The last ghost riot had created chaos without revealing an ultimate aim. Still, Hermione led the two under the invisibility cloak, down through the portrait-guarded corridors and past the fat lady's grumbling. They paused at the stairwell on the fifth-floor corridor. Hermione stopped and listened. The spot was perfectly balanced for hearing movement either up or down the stairs. Any sound would reach them immediately. "Wait," she whispered. The boys stared at her in question. "Are we really risking detention to stand here?" Ron muttered. Harry began to catch on. "You think the intruder will act while Professor McGonagall's away?" Hermione breathed out in relief, lowering her voice. The invisibility cloak wasn't soundproof. "We can't be certain the mastermind's target is the fourth floor, but from here we'll hear anything, and if things go wrong, it'll be easier to get away." She kept her tone calm. "The professor's precautions are partly psychological. They're playing a game with whoever's out there. I reckon the intruder is also gambling on when McGonagall will be missing. That makes tonight one of the likelier nights for him to strike." Outside, a blizzard lashed the castle. Snowflakes skimmed past the windows, reflecting the castle lights like pale shapes. The three waited in silence at the stairwell like hunters crouched beside a tree. Harry whispered to Ron to hide the pies. The scent could give them away even under the cloak. Ron tucked them in. Suddenly, Ron jabbed Harry with his elbow and pointed down the stairs. In the darker lower stairwell, a black shadow moved slowly. Hermione felt the boys tremble beside her. Whether from fear or excitement, she couldn't tell. Calmly, she cast a levitation charm on all three of them. She could now perform the simple spell silently. She used it sparingly, only enough to lighten their steps. That reduced the chance of any clatter, especially from Harry's wand, which could rattle loudly if not handled carefully. The shadow slipped into the fourth-floor corridor. "It really is the fourth floor," Hermione murmured, satisfied with her hunch. She shepherded the boys down the stairs, keeping as much distance from the shadow as possible. If the Potter family cloak was special, it might even block traces of aura. At least, it seemed to hide them well. They followed at a cautious distance, unseen and unheard. But Hermione didn't follow the shadow right to the door at the end of the corridor. From where they hid, they watched the figure cast a spell on the lock, then slip inside. The boys looked ready to do something rash. "What do we do now? Find a professor?" Ron hissed. "Or make a noise and scare him off," Harry added, white-faced. "Dumbledore said that place is forbidden. He must mean to do something bad. We can't let him succeed." "Let's wait," Hermione said. "I don't think the professors haven't made arrangements." She inched them closer to about 20 meters from the door. Moments later, a series of heavy thuds came from behind the door, followed by a terrifying, screeching roar, a sound like fingernails on a blackboard that made everyone's head ache. "What was that?" Ron whispered, terrified. The roar was a battle cry. Spells collided behind the door. There were explosions and the sickening sounds of breaking wood and stone. "Step back!" Hermione pulled them to the edge of the stairwell, ready to flee. Then the door blew apart. A shadowy figure careened out, slamming to the ground. He clutched something to his chest and fumbled desperately. At that instant, Hermione's sky eye, her inner sight, flared. A chill ran through her. Whatever he held felt like a summons to death. "It's the bell," she breathed. "He's trying to trigger another ghost riot." Before she could act, the intruder was pelted with spells from inside the ruined room. Forced to defend himself, he couldn't get the bell free. In desperation, he triggered something else. A fierce wind rose up. The intruder was grabbed by a gust and swept out of the corridor, tumbling down the stairs into the dark. The gust whipped the hems of their cloaks, but Hermione planted her foot and kept them from being revealed. Ron was about to speak when Harry clapped a hand over his mouth. From behind the shattered door, two figures stepped out, Professor Flitwick and a woman Hermione recognized as Lily. They looked grim, and they moved with the quick, controlled air of people used to handling dangerous things. He had an alchemy device that protected him from a killing curse, Flitwick said. And those alchemical charges he used to blow the door. I've never seen anything designed so specifically to breach ceiling charms. Lily added, "Do we pursue him?" They didn't seem to be asking each other. A massive bird emerged from the doorway, flying out and hovering, looking oddly dejected. It was Dumbledore's phoenix. "It's Dumbledore," Harry breathed under his breath. The three under the cloak exchanged glances. All of this, the setup, the containment, the response, had clearly been planned by Dumbledore. But why hadn't he come himself? The question hung unsaid as they watched the professors gather themselves and move to secure the room. 36. Dark Shadow. The corridor outside the Forbidden Corridor was dimly lit by candles burning inside the restricted room. Hermione and the two boys crouched in a shadowed corner, drawing the invisibility cloak tight around them as they tried to eavesdrop on the professors. From inside came a tired voice, Dumbledore's, calm and measured. "Wait a little longer. Don't push him too hard." All five adults sounded puzzled. Were they deliberately allowing this to happen? Hermione's mind raced. Was the whole thing an ambush to flush someone out? Footsteps suddenly hurried down the far stairwell. The trio pressed themselves closer together, desperate not to show the cloak's edge. The newcomer emerged into the candlelight, Professor Sprout, face grave. She nodded to Dumbledore's direction. "I saw no unusual movement from the ghost," she said. "I came down first, but Professor Quirrell is still on guard up there." "This isn't a solution," Lily said, frowning. "We can't keep sparing a professor to act as a bodyguard with a ghost sleeping potion. He almost pulled the bell just now. We've been far too passive." Hermione, Ron, and Harry exchanged glances beneath the cloak. The professors had, in fact, covered their bases, so even if the shadowy figure had rung the bell again, another chaos like Halloween would have been prevented. But Professor Quirrell, being dragged in from History of Magic, showed one thing clearly. Minerva McGonagall really was gone from Hogwarts. Perhaps it had been necessary to stage an elaborate bait to make whatever, or whoever, was hiding take the bait. From another angle, Hermione thought, is McGonagall that much of a deterrent? The mastermind acted as soon as she left. Dumbledore's voice came again. "In truth, our aim has been accomplished. This should be enough for him to learn his lesson. We don't need to keep all of our defenses up indefinitely." Lily opened her mouth to argue, but Flitwick cut her off. "For now, it is indeed the best course. We are not ready yet." "Agreed," Sprout said. "You're right. For Hogwarts." Lily sighed. Heavier footsteps approached the doorway, the cane striking the floor with each uneven step. Lucius Malfoy limped into view. The three under the cloak stared. Lucius was involved in the ambush too? His pale platinum hair and long, sullen face looked all the more sinister in the candlelight. He walked with a pronounced limp and a cane, clearly hurt. "My guess was correct," he sneered, lips curling. "From the moment you announced Minerva's departure this morning, I knew you would try to draw that unfortunate fellow out." "You didn't coordinate with us?" Dumbledore asked quietly. "I apologize, Lucius," Dumbledore said. "It was a last-minute decision. Only a few nearby professors were informed." Lucius limped to the threshold of the restricted room and peered in, hissing. "I was on patrol on the first floor when I heard a great commotion upstairs. A shadowy figure rushed past and threw spells at me, caught me unawares." He tapped at his injured leg. "If you'd used your rotten brain sooner, I wouldn't be limping. Tonight's plan would not have failed." He held up his hand, and in the dim candlelight, the others could just make out a twisted, discolored metal badge. Its surface was engraved with a skull spouting a serpent. "The Dark Mark," Lucius said, restraining his anger, clearly from the Green Flame Party. He spat the name like poison. "This badge bears a killing curse Lord Voldemort himself placed, past me by inches." "It's obvious now. Voldemort's spawn have infiltrated the school," he went on. "Thanks to your foolish arrangements, this threat is harder to root out." His voice was almost ashen with rage. "Perhaps I must seriously reconsider Malfoy Manor's support for Hogwarts. Under your leadership, the school has no safety, and our children live under the shadow of death. Perhaps Beauxbatons or Durmstrang would be better suited to raising the young, given the decline here." Dumbledore remained composed. We all know you will not withdraw your support, Lucius. Hogwarts is still the finest school of magic in Europe. That will not change. I am sorry you were put in danger this time, Dumbledore added gently, but I promise it will not happen again. Other professors will manage here, he told Lucius. Your injury cannot wait. Go and find Poppy. Lucius shot a look at them. Don't mistake this for the end of the matter. The plan to rescue the children will not be altered because of this. Among those kidnapped are heirs of pure-blood families. At Malfoy Manor, their influence still matters. Of course, Dumbledore said. That is why Minerva's absence was planned. When the time is right, other professors and I will join the operation. This will not fail. It had better not, Lucius replied coldly. He limped away, his cloak whispering against the stone. All right, that will do for tonight, Dumbledore said to the remaining professors. I imagine everyone is tired. Before you go, make sure the door is properly fixed. Don't let students wander inside. He added the last line with a different meaning, a glance that suggested more than the words did. Dumbledore then gave a small, conspiratorial wink in the direction of the trio under the cloak. For a moment, a small, red-golden bird, the phoenix fox, flicked its head, then vanished in a brief burst of flame. The professors nodded to one another and prepared to leave. Flitwick turned back and waved his wand to mend the shattered door. Hermione was about to tug Ron and Harry away under the cloak when Harry stopped her. He was staring fixedly at the broken doorway. Hermione followed his gaze and felt her stomach drop. When the older professors had stepped aside and Flitwick repaired the splintered wood, the trio could see clearly into the forbidden room. Behind the door, Dumbledore had warned them about lay something enormous. A giant spider. Its compound eyes gleamed in the candlelight, reflecting tiny points of fire as they swept the room. Thick, hairy, segmented legs lay like a dark, tangled grove across the floor. It lay motionless, silent, but now the source of that high, brain-splitting scream was plain. They watched the thing for a long moment, stunned, until the professors finished with the door and the creature was obscured from view. Only then did the three of them edge back upstairs, hearts pounding. Under the cloak, Ron was about to say something, but Hermione put a hand on his arm. We'll talk when we get back, she whispered. 37, the thirsty soul. It's Aragog! It has to be him! Ron blurted the moment he stumbled into the common room and shrugged off the invisibility cloak. You're right, we should have thought of it sooner, Harry said, pacing in the dark. Hagrid always talked about Aragog, but none of us ever saw him. If he was sent to guard something, it must be important. What do you think he's guarding? Ron asked. If Voldemort wants it, it must be treasure, right? Maybe the Philosopher's Stone. I read it can grant immortality and turn lead into gold, Ron offered. Impossible, Harry snapped. The last stone and its maker, Nicholas Flamel, were destroyed in that great fire in Paris ages ago. Besides, why would Voldemort want the stone? He's already beaten death. Gold means nothing to him. 2 gallons of pure dragon blood would be more useful. He tossed the thought out as if it settled nothing. Then what is it? Ron pressed, unconvinced. Maybe the Book of Admittance? Is Voldemort tired of the unreliable quill of acceptance? Or maybe it's Dumbledore's secret, some reason he's so powerful. He's the greatest of the White Wizards, and yet he's content being headmaster of a small, wandering castle. Harry shrugged. Hermione, what do you think? Hermione bit her lip and shook her head. I don't care what's behind that door, as long as it doesn't hurt us, she said. I have a feeling Dumbledore might know, Harry added. Hermione's face changed. No way. That's my family's invisibility cloak. Legend says even death can't see through it. But your dad used to wear it to get up to mischief, and Dumbledore was headmaster then too, Hermione replied lightly. Still, he doesn't seem intent on exposing us. If anything, he looks like he's encouraging us to go see what's behind the 4th floor door. Hermione's intuition was rarely wrong. For an instant, she thought she had seen Fawkes's dark eyes settle on her, and from them, a flash of a white-bearded man winking as if to say, Go on, Gryffindor, don't you want an adventure? The 2 boys, however, were the first to back down. Hermione, are you serious? You saw him? Aragog's huge. Ron gulped. Spiders were his worst fear. The small ones they'd passed near Hagrid had been enough to set his teeth on edge. Imagining Aragog's colossal body made his knees tremble. If Hagrid were with us, Aragog might be a tame giant, but if it's just the three of us—" Harry shook his head. "The cloak can't hide our smell. We'd be like 3 puddles of caramel." Hermione, for her part, was intrigued. A creature that large, a door bolted from the inside. Memories of the Forbidden Land flashed through her mind. The Finger Witch in Kalia Castle, the subterranean insect people who spat silk. Aragog felt like a composite of all those threats. If she went with Hagrid, there'd be no fight. If she sneaked in alone, she might finally get to test herself. The thought tempted her, and for a long while, she let it simmer. She knew her limits, though. This was a dangerous time. Someone from the Green Flame faction was still hiding at the school. Starting trouble was the last thing they needed. Besides, Christmas was coming. The professors would be busy rescuing children and traveling, and Hermione had to finish her thesis before the break so Professor Flitwick could take it to the magazine. Travel was difficult these days. Hogwarts was always on the move, the flu network unstable. They'd probably have to wait until the castle left Romania before normal travel to places like Malfoy Manor or other wizarding gatherings was possible. As for Dumbledore's look before he left, she decided she'd pretend she hadn't noticed, or at least wait until after Christmas. Then there would be time for adventures. "All right," she said, cutting off the speculation. "Go to bed. You don't know anything about what happened tonight. Don't tell Percy, and don't tell Fred and George. Don't go looking for Hagrid, and absolutely do not say you saw Aragog." She fixed both of them with a stern look. "None of this concerns us. We're first years. Understood?" Only when both boys nodded solemnly did she let them go. Back in the dormitory, though, Hermione could not sleep. She tossed and turned, restless. Having watched a dangerous battle and been unable to take part left her with a strange, bitter emptiness. Since she'd been integrated into this body, the only real danger she'd seen, aside from the pre-enrollment chase, had been the crazy Halloween ghost riot. The spar with Lucius had felt like a friendly duel rather than a fight for her life. For someone who had walked the Forbidden Land, whose instincts had been honed by years of real peril, it all felt too tame. She hadn't come close to death in months, hadn't been slammed into a wall by a swords force or hunted by rabid rune bears or putrid stray dogs. Her soul, shaped by relentless hardship, ached for the adrenaline of battle, for that narrow seam between lightning and flame. It wasn't that she loved danger, she loved peace. But after so much exposure to the apocalypse in the Forbidden Land, that peace felt alien. Her body trembled with the need to move. When she watched the professors fighting the shadowy assailants, she'd almost torn off the cloak and joined them. "Maybe I really am a Gryffindor," she muttered. Then another thought cut through. Maybe it wasn't mere thirst for combat. The people fighting tonight, Lily and Flitwick, were her teachers by day and warriors by night. McGonagall, absent this evening, could be facing something even worse elsewhere. Perhaps they were near Voldemort's lair, crawling with dark art traps, mechanisms rigged with lethal curses, and mad Death Eaters ready to leap from the shadows. The children they were rescuing could even be bait, a trap to draw out and destroy Hogwarts' defenders. She forced the intrusive images away and laughed softly at herself. Perhaps she'd grown too comfortable. Perhaps this excessive worry was simply the bond that tied her to this life and to the tarnished self she could not forget. In any case, lying awake was pointless. Since she couldn't sleep, she might as well do something useful. She climbed out of bed, opened her cabinet, and pulled out the notes and materials she had collected. She couldn't take part in the professor's plans that night, but she could still help in her own way, preparing her thesis, organizing what little aid she could send to the people who had taken care of her. 38. Little Perfumer, Hua Hua Xiang. At breakfast the next morning, Lily, Professor Flitwick, and Professor Sprout stared wide-eyed at the tiny glass bottles Hermione presented at the faculty table. "It's made from the pollen of the white phosphorus flower," Hermione said, a rare flush of embarrassment coloring her voice. Giving stolen goods back to their owner didn't feel entirely gracious, but this was the result of a night of tinkering. At her level, she probably couldn't help the professors in many other ways. Sprinkled forward, it creates an explosive flame over an area, she explained. Because it's pollen, it sticks to the target and keeps burning. Compared to Incendio, it activates quickly, needs no spell, and has no magical fluctuations. It should be useful for surprise attacks. So that's why you stole my pollen, Professor Sprout said, her sternness easing into something like amusement. The head of Hufflepuff, who gave students the impression of being miserly, was simply upset that her plants were being misused. Seeing Hermione turn new discoveries into practical tools softened that disappointment. What an interesting idea. Professor Flitwick couldn't resist uncorking one and sniffing. It has a dry, spicy note, different from chili, he mused. White phosphorus flower pollen is just the primer. You don't have enough of those plants to make this much hua hua xiang. You must have added other ingredients. A spice base? Lily, ever the potion expert, nodded after inhaling the diffused scent. I made a lot of attempts before settling on a spice base, but that's proprietary, Hermione said with a small pride, omitting how she'd snuck into the kitchens, befriended Dobby, gorged on forbidden treats, and filched spices. Like the Yadis flower used by perfumers in the Forbidden Land, a perfumery base activates the vitality of materials while acting as an absorbent and mixing agent. Hermione had carefully proportioned and ground ingredients pilfered from potions class and the kitchens to produce this compound. My goodness, you're only a first year, Professor Sprout exclaimed, affectionate and surprised. Minerva would be very pleased if she were here. Hermione looked sheepish. There's another thing, but I'm not sure it'll work. My potions foundation is still too weak. She produced more bottles. These contained a dangerous-looking red powder. I call it inciting spray. In theory, if you hold this powder in your mouth, mix it thoroughly with saliva, and spit it out, it will form a powerful spray that accelerates slow-acting potions. The idea came from the perfumer's poison spray in the history of the Forbidden Land. Originally, it was a treatment, enhancing healing sense, but wartime horrors turned it into a lethal weapon. Hermione, believing there wasn't a potion Lily couldn't brew, vowed to restore its original purpose, a potent inciting spray to make slow-acting potions take effect quickly. It might be even more useful in that form. Oh? Lily's professional interest was obvious. She took a bottle, examining it closely. The base is similar to the hua hua xiang, but I don't detect white phosphorus pollen. Another powder, also a spice? Why are you so fond of spices? Mixed with your base, it seems exceptionally active. Lily fell into her element. Perfumery was an ancient, refined art that, because of war, had been twisted into a tool of battle. Many perfumers had misplaced their souls, inhaling too much scent. She considered the spray thoughtfully. Using saliva as a trigger, most traditional inciting sprays are unstable. Long-established potion masters wouldn't have thought of that. Ha! Lily laughed, delighted. Without testing, I can't say how many potions it will affect, but I am very optimistic. At the very least, it should work with atomized poisons. Miss Granger, you may have founded a new discipline. A spice-based system distinct from the potions curriculum, not limited to liquids, but centered on scent, permeating body and mind through smell. I can already imagine what it would look like, Flitwick added, his eyes gentle, far softer than when he looked at Harry, almost like a proud parent. Miss Granger has another kind of magic to create. Of course, Professor, I can have a paper ready this week, Hermione replied. But why give this to us now? Sprout asked. Hermione didn't hesitate. It was Harry and Ron. They overheard you talking and learned you were about to do something dangerous. So you brought this because you were worried about the professor's safety? Sprout's expression grew even kinder. Hermione tilted her head and smiled shyly. Maybe it's not very useful, but it's all I can do. That's enough. Your thought is what matters. Flitwick sniffled, tugging at Sprout's sleeve to wipe his eyes. Thank you, Hermione. If Harry had half your sense of responsibility, I wouldn't have lost so much hair. Lily reached out to ruffle Hermione's hair. But you don't need to worry. With Dumbledore in charge, the professors will bring the kids back safely. We'll accept your inventions, Sprout said. The professors will handle outside matters. You, child, eat well, finish your homework, and don't go wandering the grounds at night with Harry and the others. She smiled. Hermione returned dutifully to the Gryffindor table. Harry and Ron were mid-breakfast, looking guilty. What did you tell the professors? Weren't we not supposed to mention last night? Harry asked. The professors told me not to go out at night with you lot anymore, Hermione answered. Ron choked on a mouthful of cockroach milk and spat. The professors all know? Probably everyone except old Malfoy. He doesn't come down to the faculty table much, Hermione said calmly. Harry made a tragic face. This Christmas holiday, Mum will murder Dad first, then me. If you get an O on your next potions homework, maybe she won't, Hermione said, delivering the merciless last blow. It was well known that Professor Potter would never give Harry an O on his homework. Life was slowly returning to something like normal. The students' excitement over the spiritual fire dwindled, replaced by chatter about the coming Christmas. The professors behaved as if nothing extraordinary had happened. They never mentioned the Green Flame Party members who had been lurking nearby, or the daring rescue plan to free the abducted children, as if those events had been forgotten. For a few days, Professor McGonagall was back at the school. She seemed composed, showing no outward sign of having been behind enemy lines or facing dark wizards, and even managed to teach 2 classes to the second years. When she learned about the 2 perfumes Hermione had developed, the usually stern woman said nothing more than, with pursed lips, slipping the tiny bottles into her robes. "I'll make good use of them," she murmured. Hermione, for her part, finished her thesis on shining stone magic. With Professor Flitwick's modest concession, she was allowed to sign the paper as first author. She had wanted to share the credit with the half-goblin dueling champion, but Flitwick waved it off with a smile. "I no longer need these honors," he said, and Hermione relented. Harry and Ron, meanwhile, had been keeping very low profiles, answering questions in class, doing their homework, spending their free time in the library. Professor Potter was pleased, convinced his son had reformed. The truth was simpler. Harry was driven by one raw wish: to survive Christmas. With the castle on the move and the world outside growing more dangerous, most students couldn't go home for the holidays. Some, like Hermione, had no parents to return to. Others lived in remote places where the flu network barely reached. Only children from wealthy, stable families, for example Draco Malfoy, who could spend the holiday at Malfoy Manor with both parents, filled out the travel forms and went home. The rest remained at Hogwarts, along with any professors and classmates who chose to stay. Besides, Christmas at Hogwarts had its own charms: better food, fewer lectures, and a display of special fireworks. Ron, true to family tradition, went home. His large household gathered every year, and even Fred and George dared not anger their mother about that. Harry chose to stay. Professor Potter insisted that Mr. James Potter come to the school for the holiday, rather than make 2 frail orphans and their mother travel thousands of miles. Everything seemed set for a quiet lead-up to Christmas, until one ordinary evening during dinner in the Great Hall. The doors were thrown open, and Professor McGonagall swept in, exhausted and with damage to her robes from recent fighting. She strode to the podium and announced in a clear voice, "I have an announcement. Thanks to the efforts of Dumbledore and the staff, we have rescued a number of the children previously held in the Green Flame Party's dungeon." Pandemonium broke out instantly. What happened? They rescued children? Is that why McGonagall's been away? Where were the other professors? Weren't they teaching this morning? One by one, the other professors entered the hall, each bearing the marks of battle: torn robes, bruises, even the faint tang of Muggle gunpowder clinging to them. The last in was Professor Sprout, carrying several small, shivering children wrapped in blankets. They were skeletal, trembling, their bodies showing signs of mistreatment. When they saw the spread on the tables, their eyes filled with an almost uncontrollable longing. Hermione counted them, 7 in all, about the same age as the new students who would have been starting this year. A flame sprang up on the podium, and Dumbledore's phoenix landed beside McGonagall. Its feathers were flecked with green, the lingering stain of the killing curse, proof that Dumbledore had faced Voldemort's most dangerous forces. In a weary voice, Dumbledore said, "Tonight we have done a great thing. We have plucked a few more unopened flowers from Lord Voldemort's hand. These children will study at Hogwarts and become part of our world." He added with a gentleness that quieted the hall, "Tonight's meal will be doubled. Later there will be a small sorting ceremony to assign the new students to houses." With that, the phoenix burst into flame and was gone. McGonagall stepped back to the podium. "First," she said, "get the children fed. I will prepare the sorting." She left, and the hall erupted into talk again. Stunned admiration and speculation. "The Daily Prophet will have this on the front page. The professors actually stole people back from Voldemort." Then someone near a window shouted, "Look!" Outside, high over the castle, a massive dark mark writhed and spat its green flame from the skull's eye sockets toward Hogwarts. But the mark was shrinking, a sign that the castle had accelerated and was already pulling away. "We've put the castle to speed," a professor called, calming those near the windows. "Our concealment charms are strong. They can't catch us." Hermione watched the rescued children as they gobbled food, their hunger revealing how much they had suffered. McGonagall returned shortly with the battered sorting hat. Because this wasn't a formal opening ceremony, the sorting was quick and simple. The hat sang a short ditty. McGonagall listened, then called the names. Of the 7, 4 were placed in Hufflepuff. Daphne Greengrass went to Slytherin, Seamus Finnegan was put in Ravenclaw, and Neville Longbottom into Gryffindor. Greengrass and Longbottom came from well-known pure-blood families and were among the noble allies at Malfoy Manor who had strongly advocated for the rescue. The Longbottoms, however, had long been close to Dumbledore. Both parents were important members of the Order of the Phoenix, a fact Harry and Ron knew because of Neville. When Neville was sorted into Gryffindor, the three of them embraced him tightly. Daphne Greengrass, filthy from her captivity, made Draco frown, and he kept his distance despite their old acquaintance. Seamus, energetic and curious, dashed off to the Ravenclaw table and immediately began peppering the nearest student with questions about whether the school taught chemistry. He had a keen interest in Muggle explosives. Hermione couldn't get close enough to the 4 Hufflepuffs to learn their names. Hufflepuff, she thought, always seemed to have the most students, even in the apocalypse. 40. Christmas gifts. Neville's arrival turned the Gryffindor trio into a quartet. Because he was half a semester behind, the other 3 took meticulous care of him, and the professors deliberately slowed their lessons so the new students could keep up. Not every house was so harmonious, though. Daphne never quite fit in with Slytherin. Her bewildered expression in class reminded Hermione of Draco's in potions, and having missed wand selection, they could only practice gestures for spells until the new students returned next year to choose wands together. As the students had guessed, the professor's rescue operation caused a sensation in Malfoy Manor and other wizarding circles. Professor McGonagall announced that at Christmas, the parents of the rescued children would be invited to Hogwarts so they could spend the holiday with their families. Reporters who had caught wind of the story, along with some prominent leaders and dignitaries, would also attend. In short, this Christmas would be livelier than any before. For Hermione, it was the first Christmas since she had come to this world. In her old life, her parents had given her small gifts, cheap handkerchiefs or similar comforts, and a hot winter meal in Muggle places had been considered a blessing. Here, even though Owlpost had been disrupted, parents sent packages in advance, and Dobby delivered presents to each child at their bedside on Christmas Eve. Hermione knew she would not be receiving anything from her parents. When she'd been brought back during the escape, she had nothing left that could bridge that loss. Perhaps, she thought, one day when she had become a powerful witch, she would return to that frozen land and stand quietly by the snowy mounds where her parents lay. She was fortunate to have friends and teachers who cared. By her bed, gifts from everyone were neatly stacked. Professor McGonagall had sent a nearly new third-year Transfiguration textbook, its margins full of notes. Even on the eve of battle against dark wizards, she had remembered the eager young Gryffindor in her house. Hermione had been busy with her thesis and self-studying the books she'd borrowed from Cedric. This new copy was a timely help. Tucked in with it was a small note that read, "Huahu Xiang is very effective. Remember our 1-on-1 reading website." Professor Sprout's gift delighted Hermione, 3 seeds of the white phosphorus flower. Breeding that plant was still experimental, so giving Hermione 3 seeds showed Sprout had made a considered sacrifice. The accompanying note specified the cultivation must be supervised by the professor, which suited Hermione fine. She needed the pollen to prepare Huahua Xiang. Professor Lily had sent a brand new set of cauldrons and a soft, warm Gryffindor scarf she had knitted herself. The little lion on it clutched a silver scepter and surveyed its surroundings like a queen. The scarf carried a faint floral scent and a trace of euphoria. Hermione wrapped it around herself immediately. More precious than the scent was its being hand-knitted by the professor. Professor Flitwick's gift was the most surprising, an acceptance letter from post-war spell research. The editors of such journals were notoriously strict, and even famous scholars' papers were frequently returned for revision. Hermione had only handed her paper to the professor a week ago. That it had already been accepted owed much to the half-goblin professor's efforts. Along with the acceptance came 200 galleons, useless at Hogwarts, but handy should she ever need to obtain things at Malfoy Manor. Hermione had not forgotten to prepare gifts of her own. She'd had Dobby deliver them earlier. For Professor McGonagall, she had sewn an anti-death vest, based on the first impression she'd had of the stern witch and padded with fine fluff to keep the professor warm and protect against small pests. For Professor Sprout, a pot of mutated devil's snare. Hermione had irradiated it with Philosopher's Stone energy from her staff and selectively cultivated a strain that grew rapidly under high concentrations and displayed extreme vigor. Professor Sprout would be fascinated. For Professor Lily, she had compiled a report on the medicinal properties of spices. Potion masters here hadn't paid much attention to spices' therapeutic uses. Hermione had cataloged and analyzed various aromatic seasonings during her work with perfumers. With Lily's expertise in this analysis, Hermione suspected new fragrances and perhaps new remedies could soon follow. To Professor Flitwick, she gave an advanced form of shining stone magic, shining stone pebbles. For many witches and wizards, this technique represented the farthest they could go in Philosopher's Stone studies, the point where most novices' explorations stalled. Its speed and near-invisible flight made it especially useful in combat. Any duelist would appreciate it. For the other professors, she prepared small bottles of inciting spray. Lily had already shown it worked on most common potions, so Hermione used it as a general Christmas gift. One person did not receive anything, old Malfoy. Her classmates had their own gifts, too. Harry sent a bag of nougat rare at school, probably from his mother. Ron gave a handwritten card and a pair of thick dragonhide gloves, which he'd apparently gotten through his brother Charlie, who worked with dragons in the volcanic lakes. Hogwarts itself had been relocated out of Romania to avoid Lord Voldemort's unchecked wrath, a fact Hermione noted only in passing. Hermione returned Harry's thoughtfulness with a guide to using a flail. She'd extracted several close-quarters techniques from the Tarnished's memories, simplified them, and wrote them out so Harry could practice. For Ron, she modified a set of wizard's chess pieces with transfiguration. The pieces became creatures and figures from the Forbidden Land. Radagon as king, the Full Moon Queen as queen, the Great Tree Guardian as knight. Ron didn't recognize the references, but the novel, cool designs won him over instantly. Other classmates offered small tokens, and Hermione reciprocated. These were children who couldn't leave the school, so the gifts were modest. She hadn't forgotten Cedric. She gave him a detailed guide to Shining Stone Pebbles. If Shining Stone magic took off, Cedric might be among the first to master it. For Neville, newly arrived in Gryffindor, Hermione thoughtfully bundled her study notes from the first half of the semester into a complete package. Then, to her surprise, a gift arrived from Draco. It was a box of exquisite pastries from Malfoy Manor, clearly made by a master chef and sealed in a magical preservation box. Hermione frowned at the unexpected generosity. She hadn't prepared any gifts for anyone from Malfoy. Was Draco trying to curry favor now, just in case of future rivalry?